Kenmore City Council is now in session pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1I. The City Council now enter into an executive session to discuss potential litigation. This executive session is slated to last approximately 30 minutes until 7 p.m. Kenmore City Council is out of executive session. We do have action from that executive session. The chair would entertain a motion to authorize the city manager and city attorney and their delegates to enforce the street improvement delay agreement related to the Weiler Short Plat and Chateau Short Plat, and take all steps necessary to enforce the agreement, including but not limited to filing an action in court.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the roll?
On that motion, Councilmember Culver,
No.
Councilmember Lutsis,
Yes.
Councilmember Sassen,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane,
Yes.
Mayor Herbig.
Yes, the motion passes 6-1. Now adjourning our special meeting and calling our regular meeting to order. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Culver,
Present.
Councilmember Marshall,
Present.
Councilmember Sassen,
I'm here.
Councilmember Shrubnik. Here. Councilmember Lutsis,
Here.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane,
Here.
Mayor Herbig,
Here.
all present.
Next on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the city of Kenmore is situated upon the ancestral lands of the Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Soxswaddle, Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Tulalip, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and other tribes who are part of the Coast Salish peoples. We recognize and express our deepest respect for their enduring stewardship and profound relationship with this land, which they have cherished and protected since time immemorial. We honor the First Peoples, acknowledge their vibrant cultures, and commit ourselves to learning from their wisdom in our journey to promote justice, equity, and mutual understanding. We pledge to stand alongside these communities in acknowledging past injustices and working towards a future that respects and celebrates the diverse heritage of this land. Now, if you'd all please stand and join me in the flag salute. Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Unless there are any objections, the agenda will stand approved as published. There are no objections. The agenda is approved. That brings us to the first of two proclamations. Our first one is for Earth Day, and Deputy Mayor O'Kane has volunteered to read that proclamation.
Whereas Earth Day was first celebrated in 1970 and has since grown into a global movement, inspiring millions to take action to protect and preserve our environment. Now, as an annual event to demonstrate support for environmental protection and to raise awareness about the critical issues facing our planet, including climate change, pollution, deforestation, biodiversity loss, and the sustainable use of natural resources. And whereas protecting our environment is a shared responsibility that requires action at every level, individual, community, corporate, and governmental, to ensure a healthy and sustainable future for generations to come. And whereas the health and vitality of our planet is essential for the well-being of all living beings, including humans, animals, plants. And whereas we acknowledge that the global challenges of environmental degradation, climate change, and food and water shortages are the crises of our generation. And whereas expanding environmental education and climate literacy is vital to enhance awareness about the environment, inform decision-making, and protect this planet for the future. And whereas the Kenmore City Council has continued its commitment to this earth by setting this year's top priority as continuing to implement the adopted Climate Action Plan and promoting environmental stewardship, including water, air, forest, and habitat restoration and preservation. And whereas by commemorating Earth Day, we affirm this commitment to safeguarding this world and its resources for future generations. Now, therefore, Nigel Herbig, Mayor of the City of Kenmore, on behalf of the City Council, does hereby proclaim April 22nd, 2025 to be Earth Day throughout the City of Kenmore.
I'd like to invite Catherine Hollis to come up and make some remarks.
Thank you all so much for having me today. I think we can all agree that our planet needs more than just a day, but acknowledging it and honoring it also acknowledges the work that we can all do. And there's a lot we can do as individuals. I was really proud to ride my bike here on the dedicated bike lanes on Juanita Drive. But that wasn't just an individual action. We need government at all levels stepping up to really rise to these occasions and to save our planet. And those bike lanes that I rode down here and will ride home are a great example of how engaging at all levels of government is going to make a difference. So I want to thank the mayor and deputy mayor and council for declaring tomorrow Earth Day and for the city's continued work on the many different ways that the city is working on climate, from parks to infrastructure and everything in between. So thank you all.
Thank you. Next, we have a proclamation for Arbor Day, and Councilmember Culver is going to read that one.
Thank you, Mayor. Whereas Arbor Day is a time-honored tradition that celebrates the roles of trees in our lives and promotes tree planting and care as a way to create a healthier and more sustainable world. And whereas trees are an essential part of our environment, providing shade, improving air and water quality, conserving energy, reducing stormwater runoff, and enhancing the beauty and livability of our neighborhoods. And whereas trees also play a vital role in supporting biodiversity and contributing to the health and well-being of the individual and our community. And whereas Kenmore benefits not only environmentally from trees, but also economically, with increased property values, enhancements in the economic vitality of business areas, and the added beauty to our city. And whereas promoting the tree planting and conservation efforts represents an investment in the future and a commitment to leaving a lasting legacy of environmental stewardship for future generations. And whereas this council recognizes the value of trees in mitigating climate change, reducing air and water pollution, and providing essential habitat for wildlife. Now, therefore, I, Nigel Herbig, Mayor of the City of Kenmore, on behalf of the City Council, do proclaim April 25th, 2025 to be Arbor Day throughout the City of Kenmore. The City of Kenmore makes this proclamation to celebrate Arbor Day and to support efforts to protect our trees and woodlands. We reaffirm our dedication to preserving and enhancing the natural beauty and ecological health of our community for generations to come.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I'd like to invite Jack Jensen, who is also a member of our Climate Action Advisory Committee, to come up and say a few words.
Good evening, Council. Arbor Day, planting trees. I always looked at tree planting as an act of faith. Involves trusting in the future, believing in the resilience of nature, and acknowledging the interconnectedness of all things. An investment in a better tomorrow, requiring patience and hope despite uncertainties. Trust in the future. Planting a tree is a commitment to a future that may not be in your immediate lifetime. Requires faith that the tree will thrive and that future generations will benefit from its presence. Resilience of nature. Planting a tree is a gesture of faith in the ability of nature to heal and regenerate. It acknowledges the power of the natural world to overcome challenges and thrive, even in the face of environmental threats. Interconnectedness. Planting a tree recognizes the interconnectedness of all living things. It acknowledges that trees provide oxygen, clean air, and shelter, and that their well-being is intertwined with the well-being of all life on Earth. And last but not least, its power or faith in the power of small actions. Planting a tree is a reminder that even small actions can leave a significant impact on the world. It's a way of demonstrating faith in the power of individual efforts to create positive change. In closing, I want to say thank you for recognizing Arbor and Earth Day and all that you do to make Kenmore the community that it is. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to invite Mr. Jensen and Ms. Hollis up front for a group photo with the council, if we could. City Manager, where's the fun?
Well, you can see it on the screen, see yourself and also Councilmember Lutsis at Hydro Cup 2025. So this year, there were 17 hydro boats that time raced on the water, and there were 12 vintage, retired, and handmade boats on display for learning about and photo opportunities. The boat drivers' ages range from 10 to 60, and some have been racing for decades. This was the first year to have an enclosed capsule boat race, and we're excited to share that Kevin Porter did 2 runs, and his time was the fastest time this year at 2.51 minutes each way on average. The day was beautiful with a brief rain shower in the middle, and the Seattle Outboard Association, the hosting organization, appreciates all of the continued city and community support for this very fun, historical, and annual event. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That's one of my favorite things every year. That brings us to public comments. We want to welcome everyone to the council's meeting. We ask that you please address your comments to the mayor and the council. Folks are going to have 3 minutes to speak. The clerk will call your name when it is your turn. Please state your name and city of residence and keep within your allotted time to make every person feel welcome and safe here. We ask that folks refrain from booing, clapping, heckling, yelling, or other interruptions. The meeting is being recorded for transparency's sake. Thank you for being here and for sharing your input respectfully. Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 2 guests on site wishing to speak and 2 guests online waiting to speak. Edward LaSalle, Patrick O'Brien, Stacy Valenzuela, and Elizabeth Mooney.
Thank you. Edward LaSalle, Kenmore. Dear City Council, as they say, if you're not outraged, then you're not paying attention. To name but a few recent events, we're now in a constitutional crisis where Trump considers the Supreme Court's orders with as much weight as a fortune cookie's advice. Moronic tariffs are tanking our economy. Every branch of the federal government is now being randomly culled because they're not ideologically pure and might actually be helping people who aren't billionaires. Imagine that. Nature reserves and sanctuaries are being opened to businesses to turn them into parking lots and wastelands. We're past living in uncertain times. We're now living in unkind and stressful times. This purposefully cruel and destructive behavior means that it is up to our local government, that's you, to create a future that makes sense and lead by example. Our state's budget is dependent up to almost 30% upon federal funds, so even they will not be able to easily replace what the Trump administration has decided to take away. While it obviously does not mean you have an easier time financing projects you're interested in driving, now more than ever, you and us all need to be leaders of our own change. Your priorities include protecting our environment, increasing housing options, including affordable ones for our residents, growing our human services offerings, developing multimodal transportations, and many more. I obviously strongly support all these priorities and congratulate you for championing them the way you have since before I arrived in this wonderful city. However, while it definitely still makes sense to be a team player and co-create around key initiatives with our partners and neighboring cities, it might be time now to lead first and start small, but start now only to partner later if possible. Yes, I'm well aware that the effects will be smaller than you might wish, but it might be better to have a little something now, which matches Kenmore's needs and ambition, than wait forever for a bigger project that will not and cannot happen in the next 4 years or beyond. Please fight the move fast and break things tech bro approach and replace it in Kenmore by lead decisively and build things today. Thank you.
Pat O'Brien, Kenmore, Washington. Although I agree with your proposal that you don't have any money because it's gone, I do object to your view of causality. The causality happened because of reckless spending, bad policy, and this city is guilty of all those things too. You've got many projects, boathouses, Kenmore maintenance facility, expenditures for multiple decades on the Kenmore Lake Point project, which is a hazardous waste dump. And to try to paint it as, oh, our next opportunity to do something great for the environment, let's put people out there. Let's poison them. Let's not in any way enforce the consent decree from the state of Washington Supreme Court that has dictated testing, which you haven't seen to, and remediation, which has not been done in the way specified in that document. And you were all guilty of that. You all play footsie with Pioneer Towing, with the deceased Gary Sargent, who basically was blackmailing the state and the county into throwing money at you so you'll land on the grenade of Lake Point. And that, to me, is the biggest waste of money, time, and effort as you watch the asphalt plant continue to spew. Under Rob Carlindsey, it was given new operating capabilities. It's 24/7 now. They have the lights on all the time, all weekend. Those are the things you should be working on. And the things you care to focus on are an absolute travesty. And may I point out that I'm very upset with the behavior of the mayor who conspired to limit my First Amendment rights to talk about what I want to talk about within reason at this podium right here. He said I couldn't comment on things before the city council. Well, indeed I can. And if you ever want to make a case out of it, there's plenty of case law that says you're wrong. So Nigel, I am absolutely hoping that you don't run again, because I think your time spent helping us is over. And I'm pleading with the audience out there. Anybody in Kenmore that wants to run against Nigel is going to get my full support, because I don't see that your leadership is leading us to a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy Valenzuela, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Stand by, barely.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can. Go on.
Thank you. Stacy Valenzuela, Kenmore. Sure feels like the same old tricks, claiming tree saving while the city cuts and damages trees. Labeling housing inclusionary does not make it so. Missy Middle was supposed to encourage providing all sizes of housing at all income levels, not exclude lower levels of incomes. Why Kenmore has not provided affordable housing units after years stating the priority of the council to build affordable housing? The housing levels of affordable units brought forward by staff label only inclusionary zoning are excluded, almost forcing our residents out of the city when the needs are so high with 60 to 70% cost burden residents. Similar to the mislabeling of senior housing for Housing First permanent support of Plymouth Housing. The Regional Affordable Housing King County Dashboard has shown for years that 30% AMI and 50% AMI and below rental level affordable housing units and 50 to 69% home ownership are the highest desperately needed in Kenmore and throughout King County. I know of a handful of developers that included Imagine Housing that had been attempting for years to build truly affordable housing here in Kenmore. We also need 25% of all projects to be affordable housing. I'm concerned with the Planning Commission felt rushed and wanted to review further this inclusionary zoning to come forward with a minority report. Did you see the article from Lakeside Partners filling out the gap? At their presentation, you heard the incomes of our most vulnerable neighbors confirmed that we have been sharing with you for years. What are you going to do when more become homeless on fixed incomes? More families are homeless on our streets. Let's talk Lake Point, also known as Kenmore Industrial Landfill Matka Site. Where is the promised testing results before any acquisitions? I noticed even at the city's state of address, there is a disconnect. Will council follow through on their list of priorities, which include resident priorities, or staff directive wants that are listed as in flight, whereas Lake Point is number 6 on the priorities of the council, lower yet on the priority of the residents, but number 1 in staff directive? Who is leading Kenmore? Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Mooney, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We hear you. Go on.
Hi, thank you. Hi, council and community. Elizabeth Mooney, citizen of Kenmore since 1995, and I'm president of People for Environmentally Responsible Kenmore. We're going to be coming to Earth Day event at Rhododendron Park, the city's event on Saturday, April 26th, along with our friends from Snow King Watershed Council and other folks. So I encourage people to come, and I am here to do two things. One, say that I'm in favor of alternative compliance to exempt R1 properties along Swamp Creek and R1 and R4 properties along the Sammamish River from middle housing regulations. And that is thanks to some of my friends who work hard on all that complicated reading and working together with other folks in the city. So the second thing that I'm going to try to bring up in the next minute has to do with last September, Snow King Watershed Council and and PERC, thanks to a comment at public comment that Eric Admin read, the president of the Snow King Watershed Council, I would like to kindly ask the council, and I did leave a message for Deborah Zrebnik today. I don't know if you got it, but I am hoping that some of you who voted to amend, to make the changes to the exceptional tree ordinance last fall, and that was due to all the complications that came as a result of the LARIS project. I am asking you respectfully and kindly to please consider bringing that up again, those of you who voted to change it, and that we get back to the original exceptional tree ordinance so that more of the trees will not be at risk as we go forward. I think it would be a huge and wonderful celebration to have that happen and educate the people at Earth Day that this has come up. And that, you know, there are complications about having housing, but also protecting our exceptional trees. So if you look back last September, you can see the comments to Kenmore City Council that PERC and Snow King Watershed Council asked you to please not make changes to the exceptional tree ordinance that are being proposed. We offer the following reasons. And in summary, it was a bad idea, and it's inconsistent with Kenmore's environmental protection and climate goals. So I can talk more at any time you want about this. Please vote, bring it back up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mooney. Mayor Herbeck, that completes our speakers list.
Thank you. That brings us to our consent agenda. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councilmember Culver?
I would like to remove items B and C from the consent agenda and would otherwise move to approve consent agenda item A.
All right, we have a motion from us to approve item A on the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, don't all jump at once. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That brings us to item B on the consent agenda, authorize the city manager to execute an interlocal agreement with King County to accept a Conservation Futures Grant Award of $7,946,700 to acquire 2 properties. Councilmember Culver, do you require any additional information on that particular piece, or can we move straight to a vote?
I do not know. I have a motion if that would be in order.
Well, we probably need to get this in, I don't know, what is your motion?
I would move to table this potentially indefinitely. I think this agreement should come in front of council. And I would kindly ask for a second if that is in order.
All right, motion dies due to lack of a second. The chair would entertain a motion to approve item B on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on item B? Councilmember Culver?
I think given the years and decades of comments that this has gotten from the community, and we say all the time that community voices matter, I think this should come in front of council for a vote, and I think it should be part of the record for transparency. Obviously, it can come up in like a public records request or something, but Lake Point is a number 6 priority. We chose not to pursue this as something to go to the voters with last year. I'm a little dubious about millions of dollars just sort of showing up, and I know more is on the way with the August levy. So yeah, I have said my piece, and I think the community has as well, and I hope we have the wisdom to listen to them. Thank you.
Councilor Sassen?
Yes, thank you. I wonder if I could request that we have clarity on what becomes of the Conservation Futures Grant should we not move forward with Lake Point? Just for clarity for the community.
There isn't a time constraint at the moment, but I do think that if we, as a body, if the council decides to not move forward with these funds, there is some risk at some point that there are other projects that could be funded instead. So I don't have a sense of the timing for that. There wasn't a deadline now, but I think it's good practice if the council wants to accept the funds to do that, but that's up to you, of course.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yeah, I mean, just as a point of clarification, this is one of the largest Conservation Futures grants ever awarded by King County, and it's an opportunity for us to have a portion of the purchase be funded by the county, and with again, the purpose as stated there is restoration, which is a high priority of it's one of the top, always, I mean, in the last several years, always been one of the top 2 priorities is environmental sustainability. So I am, and that's for the Lake Point piece. And then the other piece is, also related to that same goal. So I am very much supportive. Lake Point is every time I've been out to the community every 2 years when I talk to people, Lake Point is the number 1 thing that I hear.
Any further discussion? Councilor Lutzis?
I'd also like to point out that this total here is multiple projects. It's not just Lake Point. This is all of the grant funding being received for other things, including, well, and I guess otherwise speaking to tributary 0057 property acquisition. So it's not just tied up in Lake Point, but this is the block sum for all of the site acquisition and restoration work.
Any further discussion? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, and I just want to just affirm Councilmember Shrubnik's point that this is a project that is incredibly important to our community. We've had surveys, doorbelling. People do want to see Lake Point activated and restored. And this is a Conservation Futures Grant. This is environmental stewardship, and we have to begin somewhere. The mouth of of the Sammamish River to Lake Washington is a critical area that does need to be restored for salmon habitat recovery, along with many other things. And if we don't begin now, when will we? We have to take care of our watershed and take action now. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilor Culver?
Would just note for the record on that Conservation Futures, your Councilmember Lutzis is correct. It's not 100% Lake Point. It's 96% Lake Point. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
On the motion to authorize the city manager to execute an interlocal agreement with King County to accept a Conservation Futures Grant Award of $7,946,700 to acquire 2 properties. Councilmember Culver.
No.
Councilmember Lutzis.
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall.
Yes.
Councilmember Sassen.
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane.
Yes.
Mayor Herbig.
Yes, the motion is approved 6-1. That brings us to item C on the consent agenda, authorize the city manager to execute the interlocal agreement with King County to accept a cooperative watershed management award program grant of $750,000 to conduct an environmental evaluation of the Lake Point shoreline. I would entertain a motion to approve item C.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion from the deputy mayor, second from Councilmember Shrubnik. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Lutzis.
Listening to our residents and the comments about conducting testing, this grant is specifically to conduct an environmental evaluation of the Lake Point shoreline. I just want to point that out, that this is a priority of the council and proceeding with this, and we are receiving funds external, not costing the city to accept these funds to do that testing and to come forward with the results of that.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
On the motion to authorize the city manager to execute the interlocal agreement with King County to accept the Cooperative Watershed Management Award Program grant of $450,000 to conduct an environmental evaluation of the Lake Point shoreline. Councilmember Sassen.
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yes.
Councilmember Culver.
No.
Councilmember Marshall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lutzis.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane.
Yes.
Mayor Herbig.
Yes, the motion is approved 6-1. That brings us to our presentation, where we're going to be introduced to a new staff member, Community Development Senior Planner, Brittany Chu, presented by Assistant City Manager, Community Development Director, Debbie Bent.
Good evening, Council. It's my pleasure to be here this evening and introduce Brittany Chu, who is our new senior planner. Brittany came to us from Arkansas. She has her graduate degree and was working as a planner down there. So she's been working just a few short weeks with us, but she's already hit the ground running. In fact, her first presentation will be before you later on the council agenda. So Brittany brings a lot to the table, and I'm excited to have her as part of the community development team and city staff team. So Brittany, would you like to say anything?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Debbie. It's great to meet all of you and looking forward to working with you all. Yeah, I'm super happy to be part of the team. Debbie and Todd have been wonderful, just great to work with, and Shannon. So yeah, I'm really lucky to be a part of this team, and thank you all.
Excited to have you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Welcome. That brings us to a public hearing on proposed ordinance number 250628, Kenmore Municipal Code, Title 12 and Title 18 amendments, chapters 12.05, 12.70, and 18.35, presented by Engineering Director John Vicente.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm here tonight to talk about some amendments to Title 12 and Title 18 of our KMC. Primarily looking at updating the right-of-way landscaping maintenance requirements within Title 12. Also looking to do some cleanup of the definitions chapter, the landscape chapter, and also making some changes to Chapter 18.35, which talks about right-of-way landscaping, and we felt that we should consolidate them all into one title. The items are for discussion only. We're not doing any decision, not requesting any decisions tonight. And then we also have to do a public hearing later on after this presentation. So I'm going to bore you and go through every section and all the changes that I've made, and I will try to be as quickly as possible because I've been asked to. Chapter 12.05, the general provisions, we added a definition for traveled way within certain portions of this title. We talk about traveled way, but it's not very well defined, so I added a definition for that. Clarify the definition for engineering permit to include right-of-way work to be consistent with other sections of our code. And then I also clarify the definition of right-of-way to be specific to Kenmore. That was something we felt we needed to do based off past experiences. And then one thing that did not get into the packet due to me copying the wrong thing, I am adding a definition for the quote person to include exactly what's saying here. So the red line version you have doesn't have this, but the final version will have this exact language in it. Oh, actually, Never mind. So chapter 12.70, this is the sidewalk planting strip and street trees section. I just did some general reorganization to make it flow a little bit better. Did some clarification of language, and then the pertinent information from chapter 18.35, I moved into this section. Talks about noxious weeds and a few other things that I incorporated into this section. And then I also added new language about trash collection, which I'll get to in a little bit later. So 12.70010, definitions. I clarified the definition of hazardous tree to add dead trees. Dead trees are a wonderful thing on open spaces and wetlands, that sort of thing, but they're not exactly a good thing we want to have in our right-of-way. And so clarifying that a dead tree is also a hazardous tree for safety reasons and for removal. 127040, sidewalk reconstruction repair. This did clarified some plan submittal requirements to be per the road standards. So we require developers to provide plans for everything they do. And we're pretty much saying that here's what you need to include in your plan set, being more clear. 127050, the right-of-way vegetation maintenance. Clarified that the abutting property owner we clarified abutting property owner responsibilities. We added a safety hazard as a basis for maintenance. So if there's a safety hazard, you need to get out there and maintain it. We added soil as an encroachment item. We talk about shrubs and trees and rocks, but we don't talk about soil. So I added that in there. Indicated that weeds and grass need to be kept down to under 12 inches in height. Indicated noxious weeds need to be removed. That was from Title 18. Use of the right-of-way is also to include pedestrians on gravel shores. We list asphalt walkways, sidewalks, everything else, but we don't mention shoulder. So a lot of places, the gravel shoulder is the pedestrian walkway, so we want to incorporate that in here to make sure that it stays free and clear for pedestrians. Vegetation is not to intrude on the traveled way, so we've defined traveled way, spelling it out specifically that the vegetation cannot intrude on the traveled way. We updated the vegetation clearance diagrams. There were some modifications that needed to be made for height reasons, and so we've updated those. Plus, we added better resolution pictures and just completely updated them to make them look nicer. And then we also added tree replacements for those who are removed. So as a tree has to be removed because it's a safety issue, we now have a requirement that says, depending upon where you've removed it, a tree has to be replaced. Some trees can't be replaced because they are in their particular location is hazardous. But if a tree is being removed and it's not because its location is bad, but it's a bad tree, then they're required to replace it. 127080, we added some exemptions to the maintenance. So we clarified an exemption for dual frontages. Some properties have a frontage in front and back, but there's no side, so it's not a corner lot. So it made a provision that if there isn't a continuous right-of-way to get access from the front to the back, that they're exempt from maintenance, because I don't want people to drag a lawnmower down the street, cross a shoulder down to mow something. So put that in there. We're providing some assistance of traffic control services for mostly single-family resident, duplex, triplex for large trees. And this is primarily for safety reasons. If we've got say Simons Road or Juanita, and we need someone to do that, we want to take control of the traffic control so that it's safer for the public. Again, that's what I just said. 12.70085 added a section for garbage, trash, and yard waste. We don't really have any provisions that say you can't store your trash receptacles in the right-of-way, and so added provisions to say that they need to be acceptable containers. You can't just throw garbage out in the right-of-way for pickup. 24 hours prior to, 24 hours after your collection time, they need to be removed. They're not allowed to block the traveled way, except as noted below. They have to be placed either in the amended strip or on the driveway approach. If there's only a curb, within a foot of the curb. If there's no curb, then within the shoulder. If none of those exist, they just need to find a level, safe area for placement. 18.3 landscaping. Title 12 addresses all right-of-way landscape requirements, and so we removed all the references from the right-of-way landscaping requirements and put them into 12. And then anything that was redundant was just removed. Anything that was new was added to Title 12, like the noxious weeds. With that, if there's any questions, I'm free to help to answer, and then we can do our public hearing.
Any questions before we open up the public hearing? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions before the public hearing, so I will open up the public hearing. Let me get my. For the public hearing, folks will be granted 3 minutes to speak. Same public comment rules apply. Excuse me, including stating your name and city of residence, addressing your comments directly to the city council, and not splitting your time with others. If your comments have been fully expressed by preceding speakers, we encourage you to summarize your statements by stating your name, city of residence, and saying, I agree with the previous speaker. We'll hear testimony from on-site guests first, followed by any pre-registered virtual guests. Thank you for taking the time to participate. Clerk.
Mayor, we have 2 guests wishing to speak, Patrick O'Brien on site and Stacy Valenzuela online.
Pat O'Brien, Kenmore. I'm just shocked that you would change any city code without having a red line document of what it is currently and what he wants it to be. It's pretty much a sole provider here where he is constructing what the new code is that's affecting the property owners in Kenmore. And I know through personal experience, when Brian Hampson worked for Kenmore, he cited me for 19 violations, including having blackberries in my yard. You think there's a vendetta there? You think that was wielded as a weapon against people that are dissenters in this city? Absolutely. What does the city do when it goes from being an unincorporated part of King County into an incorporated part of King County? You should ask your attorney, because what maintenance King County provided, Kenmore assumed on an ongoing basis, and no amount of finagling is going to get Kenmore out of the responsibility they had when they assumed that role and took it from King County. And that's saying that many people have vegetation within a certain distance from the roads and have historically been maintained by King County and then Kenmore. And he wants to say, well, it's up to the property owner to maintain it. We'll tell you what plants we want there. We'll tell you if what you're doing is acceptable or not. And I'm saying, if the city wants to have plantings, they should put them in, because the property owner doesn't have any rights to say what that is really. And then the city should maintain them, especially if they have a history of having to do so when we incorporated. And that has not been discussed. As a matter of fact, it can't be discussed because now, under these new rules, you get 3 minutes at a public hearing, not 5 minutes as it usually was in the past. But once again, there's a suppression of public voice, and there's a lot of things that you don't know about your own city code that these people institute, and you will go to court over it and you will lose, vis-a-vis the guy on the hill that had the cars that the city didn't like, and they lost $150,000 and went to King County Superior Court. It was appealed at state Supreme Court, and the city of Kenmore was going to lose all over ordinances that came out of this city. I'm not blaming you personally, but the city has a bad habit of ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan.
Ms. Valenzuela, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We hear you.
Thank you. Stacy Valenzuela, Kenmore. I'm going to again request that the city be fair and ethical. Public hearing notices should be posted in public site that residents can easily see, sent to all residents announcing a public hearing is scheduled to be included. Then give our residents 3 to 4 weeks to weigh in and council to read those responses prior to a vote in the business agenda, which this is listed in tonight. I don't understand. We have been told how the taxpayers, the residents, needed the city to hire all of these public workers to maintain the sidewalks, the planters, the trees, needed to buy a street cleaner that most do not even see on their street. What does Public Works do? If the city Public Works is not functional and keeps designating the same resident taxpayers to bear the burden, more and more work, taking more and more from the residents in funding. Why are taxpayers funding public works? Why are they funding the public works facility? Taxing the taxpayers with funding can be better spent on a public work and park employees and consultants on something else like affordable housing. And not only work it be physical challenge for some of our seniors and most vulnerable, but it's costly for the overburden. And we keep hearing that there will be discounts in garbage, in car registration, in utilities for seniors and those on fixed incomes, but those don't come through. Please delay the adoption on this amendment and allow all of the residents to weigh in. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor, that completes our speakers list.
Is there anybody else present wishing to be heard? Anyone else present wishing to be heard? Final call. Anybody else present wishing to be heard? Seeing none, I am closing the public hearing. I would like to point out for the public's sake that if you look on the online agenda, attachment 2 and attachment 3 gives a redlined version of the ordinance, as we do for every ordinance that we pass. It might be blue lined instead of redlined, but it is there and it does show all the changes. So just clarifying that for the public. Do we have, well, that brings us over to the business agenda, which is the same item, proposed ordinance 250628. Do we have any further questions for Mr. Vicente? Councilmember Shrebnick.
Thank you, and thank you to the public that made comment on this. This is a good presentation, John, and thank you for tackling this issue. I think this is something that I might have raised before, but and particularly I want you to speak to whether, I believe this includes, for example, maintenance, and we're on sidewalk and right-of-way maintenance, maintenance of planter strips in sidewalks that the city built. Is that right? So when there's like the plantings in those sidewalks, that's now up to the residents?
So generally speaking, the plantings in those amenity strips are the responsibility of the adjacent property owner to
Right.
maintain. There are certain locations where the city does the maintenance, and it's typically where we have irrigation in place.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. But those are still, I mean, just to be clear, those are still, they're not owned by the property owner. I mean, the adjacent property owner. They're right away. So I guess, is there an opportunity to consider, I do see some considerations of public assistance in the case of large tree issues and, traffic control and that kind of thing. I have heard when I go around that, issues of, someone's maybe older adult and maybe has a disability and makes it hard for them to do right-of-way maintenance, or maybe there's a financial hardship issue. Are those things that we could consider on a case-by-case basis to provide assistance with that?
I would say there's probably some opportunity, but without doing more investigation as to whether or not we can do that, the gift of public funds, but also
right.
dealing with the issue of how do you manage a program where you look at providing financial assistance?
Well, or just I mean, I guess I wasn't thinking of financial assistance. I was thinking of actual physical assistance, like we would actually maybe do the work if the person could not either afford it or maybe isn't physically able to.
And that would be a policy level decision that had to be discussed, because
Yeah.
with more work takes away from our
I understand.
maintenance folks, which
I
are already, they've got a lot of work they already have to do. So to take on this extra burden would either have to reduce the level of service we have throughout the city or bring in more crew to help manage that
understand.
additional work. So,
I understand.
yeah.
Well, yeah, so that's one issue I may raise now. And then, yeah, well, particularly in, I mean, where this has come up is in planter strips where the city actually, you know, chose the plants and maybe they're very fast growing and, you know, the previous plants weren't. And so that's become kind of an issue. And then the other just sort of general question is, you know, how are we thinking about I hate to have things on the books that we don't enforce or don't have a plan to enforce. So how do we or would we enforce this kind of thing?
So we do. Our right-of-way inspector is charged with monitoring and enforcing the code within the right-of-way. We don't
Okay.
actively go out and look for situations, but
right.
if he happens to be out driving and he sees something, then
Okay.
he will write a letter for enforcement, or if we get a service request, someone makes a complaint, then we go out and address it. But we do enforce where we can, when we can. We actually have a rating system, a 5-point rating system that identifies the priority and when we should be
Okay.
addressing these.
Okay.
Safety reasons, of
Okay.
course.
So we do have
the
a
top.
mechanism.
Yeah, and then the ones
Okay.
that are really just more of a nuisance, those go lower down and we don't necessarily address them until we have the resources to do it. So-
And last point of clarification, so let's say I mean, because I know this exists, there are areas that have these very fast-growing plants in them. Is it okay for an adjacent property owner to replace them?
So if they want to replace them, they can definitely contact us to find out the possibility. We have a list of plants that are acceptable to be placed in
Okay.
the right of way,
Uh-huh.
but then we also have a provision that says that anything else you can bring to us, and we
Sure.
can look
Okay.
to see if it's something
Okay.
that would be okay. So if somebody doesn't like something in the right of way, we're very open to having it be replaced with something that might be easier to manage.
Okay, then
Yeah.
the only thing I want to raise to this body when everybody's done with their questions is the issue of assistance if somebody has a disability or financial hardship.
Councilmember Lutzis.
I actually had the same comment as Councilmember Srebnick, and specifically where I felt that it may fit best was under 12.70.080, which is the exemptions section of that. And there already are cases where exemptions can be moved, and so, I mean, if there is sort of a precedence where exemptions can be made without that being considered a gift of public funds, I don't see why we couldn't add another bullet point that says something along the lines of for properties where an owner can prove a financial hardship. I mean, we allow assistance for other things throughout the city, not only the city, but county, reduced utility help and other sorts of programs like that. So I would wonder if potentially that could be something, given that case where there might be some unique case, but at least allowing the city manager to have that flexibility to potentially, in a certain situation, grant an exemption.
And there is language in there that says that the city manager's discretion, the city can maintain certain frontages or certain parts of the right of way. So we have that overall caveat in there. I would recommend against adding additional language to that, at least at this point, because I really don't know what it would take to implement such a thing. And it would just take a bit of effort to figure out how we write the policy, how do we determine who's eligible, criteria, then working with our operations director to find out how we would possibly make that work with their scheduling and timing. So again, we do have language in there that allows the city manager to decide that certain frontages can be maintained by city crews if we wanted to. So we at least have that language in there and the flexibility for the city manager to make that decision if they feel that it's necessary.
Councilmember Sassen.
Speaking more actually to the community rather than to you, John, I feel like this is a terrific opportunity for partnerships with volunteer organizations, with scout troops, with our students at Inglemoor and other local high schools that have volunteer hours that are required of them. And so I'm just putting a call out to say that there may well be a need, and if those organizations could be in touch, that would be very helpful.
And John, just a clarification, and maybe correct my memory if I'm misremembering something, but this was probably 8 years ago or something. The city did change the code. It's been a long time since the city changed the code to put the right of way, the parking strip, to make that the responsibility of the abutting property owners, right? This isn't a new change and that you're proposing here.
Well, one, this is not a new change. The amendment that was done 8 years ago was not a new change. This has been in the code since before I've been here, and I've been here over 10 years. So what I had done with the previous amendment is I just expanded what the planting, the amenity strip was. I included unimproved right-of-way, whereas before it just talked about improved right-of-way. So that was the big change they made. But the maintenance of the right-of-way has always been in our code since at least before 2015.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification there. Any further questions? Councilmember Shribnick?
Can you point me to the spot that you're mentioning that gives the city manager's office latitude?
Gonna make me find it. So that would be, oh, it's so 12.70.086, other exemptions based upon standards which shall be established by the department. There's that one. Another one, I just have to find it.
You say 1270.086? I'm not even seeing that.
Not seeing it off quick here. I know it's in there.
Oh, is it 1270.080, number 2? And that's,
Fortunately, I'm going through the red line version, so it's not very well
Um,
organized.
that's about hazardous trees specifically.
Yeah, that one gives the exemptions, general exemptions that we can create internally if we feel the need. There is those section, it may not be in area. No, it's in here.
Well, and then 3 does say other exemptions based upon standards which shall be established by the department. I'm curious what other folks feel like, if that's sufficient.
Councilor Lucis?
I definitely, I think Councilmember Shribnick and I are thinking on the same wave here that, I don't think this quite flushes it out, and I wouldn't feel comfortable from at least looking at this through an equity lens of not calling out some sort of ability to provide an exemption for those facing financial hardship. And again, it's allowing that opportunity, because the precursor to this says that the city manager may approve an exemption, but it's not saying it's going to be guaranteed every time, but just allowing that to be present in code. I think I'd feel a lot more comfortable approving this.
I did find the language. It's 12.70.050. Bullet near the end. Bullet H says certain planting strips, sidewalks, unimproved right-of-way, and other right-of-way areas may be maintained by the city at the city manager's discretion.
Deputy Mayor?
Given our staff's description of the stresses on our public works and, staff, the ability to do this, I actually personally very much prefer the language that's in the ordinance that John has pointed out. I think that covers it. I'm concerned that we really don't know what the impacts of adding that line in are by being so specific. So I'm comfortable with where it is right now, and I just wanted to state that.
Any other questions or discussion? This will be coming back before us for final passage.
at
Do
the
you have
end.
an idea what the timing is on that, John?
The end of May, the Tuesday meeting after Memorial Day.
Okay. So any further discussions? Because he's going to take back our comments and make any changes and bring it back. So,
I guess if I could get some more clarity as to what changes.
I'm not sure if you have consensus for any changes at this
Yeah.
point. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions or comments, so. Councilor Shrubnik?
I mean, is there a way you can think about language that could include, financial hardship or disability or other, similar constraints or something, just so that we're calling that out? I mean, this is something that we've heard from folks, so I'm uncomfortable kind of just ignoring it, but or at least tell us the feasibility when you come back. And it would be, I see the H there, certain planting strip sidewalks on improved right-of-way and other right-of-way areas may be maintained by the city manager discretion. Could there be a clause of, city manager may consider things like, it doesn't seem like that would add a lot of risk, but I mean, guess I would be interested to hear that, but not if I don't have, a majority that is interested in that same thing. So, yeah.
Councilor Marshall?
I'd be interested in some proposed language along the lines of council members Shrubnik and Lutzis.
Councilor Sassen?
Yeah, I'm coming to agree. I feel like even if it said at the city manager's discretion, based on, small list of, financial hardship, physical disability, any of those.
Yeah, I can look to add follow-up language within that bullet that says something that's such as, for
I think that
example,
would also make it easier on the city manager.
So yeah, I'll look and see what we can do. I have to have some internal discussions on that first, but definitely take a look at that. And also I do want to mention that I'm coming back for more Title 12 changes later this summer. So if we don't get it tackled now, I'm coming back to make some changes specifically around missing middle, but some other global changes I need to make too that didn't get into this. So there'll be another opportunity to talk about this at a later date if there's interest.
All right. And in my recollection, I can only really remember one time where somebody from the public had barriers, I think, towards maintaining what was in their right of way that reached council, as far as I know. But
We've had a couple, and dovetailing on what Councilmember Sassen said is our former city manager did organize Boy Scout volunteers to help folks that had concerns. And so there is somebody in the community that has done that. So it is possible, and we have no problems with that as long as everyone agrees to it. So.
All right. Well, thank you, and we will see you in May. All right. That brings us to the second item in our business agenda. Thank you very much, Mr. Vicente. Planning Commission's recommendations on draft middle housing, accessory dwelling unit, and affordable housing inclusionary zoning code amendments presented by Assistant City Manager, Community Development Director Debbie Bent, Principal Planner Todd Hall, and Planning Commissioners.
Good evening, Council. So we have the Planning Commission here this evening to present their recommendations on middle housing, accessory dwelling units, and affordable housing code amendments. So we have two presentations. One, first of all, by staff to give an overview of the process and the code amendments, and then followed up by the Planning Commission, and they will then describe their thinking and how they reached the code amendments, and will individually give some information about some points of discussion that led to the proposed amendments that you be considering. So if that's okay, Mayor, I'd like to turn this over to Todd to start the presentation. Thank you.
All right, good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. Community development staff are pleased to be here tonight with you, along with the Planning Commission, to present the middle housing, accessory dwelling unit, and affordable housing code amendments. I'll provide you with a brief introduction of where we've been to date, a high-level summary of the amendments, and then I'll turn it over to Planning Commission Chair Tracy Banashinsky and the Planning Commission. So as you recall, the state passed new legislation back in 2023 requiring cities to adopt both housing policies and implement zoning regulations to allow for middle housing. These types include duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. In 2024, Kenmore's population was just under 25,000. This meant that under the middle housing law, Kenmore was classified as a Tier 3 city. However, earlier this year at a joint City Council Planning Commission meeting, the City Council directed staff to pursue the Tier 2 city requirements, which are shown up on the screen. This is because Kenmore is just about to cross the 25,000 population threshold, so it made sense to plan as a Tier 2 city. Back in 2022, Council adopted amendments to the housing and land use elements, also considered middle housing regulations at the time, but ultimately they weren't adopted. Council requested more community engagement. That community engagement began back in 2023 under the Framing the Future of Housing title, and the final report and findings were presented to City Council in September of that year. Then last year, the major update of the comp plan was completed in December, and we included amendments to the housing and land use elements with policies on middle housing. And then lastly, extensive community engagement has been conducted over the life phase of this project, including an open house, booths at the farmers market over last summer, website updates, several newsletters, and other posts. City staff and consultants coordinated with development services and public works departments on code amendments to ensure consistency throughout the municipal code. Planning Commission held multiple meetings throughout 2025 to develop and refine code amendments and has heard from community members along the way. And just last Tuesday, the Planning Commission held their public hearing to hear public testimony and make a recommendation to the City Council, which is being presented to you this evening. On the screen are some examples of the types of housing that Planning Commission has, middle housing that the Planning Commission has recommended to be considered. Depending on lot characteristics, one of these types may be, or one or more may be considered for a particular property. In terms of middle housing amendments, we established a unit density standard, which is 2 units per lot, or 4 units per lot if you're within a certain distance within major transit stops, that being the 522 corridor, or housing project provides at least one affordable housing requirement. Also established affordable housing requirements and parking requirements for middle housing types. Residential zones that are largely limited to single-family residential types include the R1, R4, or R6, and these are the zones where middle housing types will be applicable. State law allows an approach of applying middle housing regs to 75% of the residential lots and excluding up to 25%. In order to ensure protection of critical areas and habitat corridors, the Planning Commission's recommendations is to exclude all R1 parcels and R4 parcels adjacent to waterways. Additionally, these requirements do not apply to other portions of a lot that has critical areas or buffers. Public benefits were discussed, and development incentives were added to promote a variety of housing types to increase flexibility in development, promote smaller unit types, retain the existing unit on site, and considering compatibility with surrounding development. These were some of the key factors established by the Planning Commission in terms of developing these incentives. And also setting a gross floor area maximum of 1,200 square feet would give you a density bonus for just cottage housing. Note that these are not requirements, but just an additional allowance if a property owner or developer want to use it on their property. Also established unit lot subdivision regulations consistent with state law. This process would allow for fee simple, separately owned units within a parent lot. All illustrated here, or as illustrated here, there's a couple of different ways you can have ownership of one parent lot. The overall big picture is that it allows simple ownership of land for middle housing types. And then moving on to HB 1337, which is the accessory dwelling unit law. This requires cities for up to 2 ADUs on a single family zone property, removes the owner occupancy requirement, and cities cannot regulate ADUs under 1,000 square feet, and removes any public street improvement requirement. It's important to note that while ADUs are not counted as one of the missing middle types, they are allowed to be counted toward unit density requirements. So now I'll hand it over to Debbie and she'll speak to the affordable inclusionary housing component.
So where would the affordable inclusionary housing regulations apply? They would apply to residential development within the R4 and R6 zones. Projects of 3 units or less would be exempt from such requirements. Projects of 4 units or more, 10% of units must be affordable. So projects building 4 to 9 units would either pay a fee in lieu for that fraction of a 1 unit or build a unit on site. A fee in lieu would be established by the council, and the ARCH model estimates it would be at approximately $6 a square foot. Projects of 10 or more units, an affordable unit would then be required to be provided on site. Affordability at 80% of area median income for ownership units or 50% AMI for rental units. The recommendation is a delay in implementation of these inclusionary requirements until January of next year to allow folks who are currently considering an application to become vested under the current regulations. So per state law, cities may consider requiring affordable housing at the time when residential capacity increases. So middle housing is essentially a capacity increase in those residential zones. What ARCH is recommending is that affordability requirements be applied when it's reasonably certain that most projects would gain more from the upzoning, the increase in capacity, than they lose in affordable housing. So there's a balance there. So ARCH did the heavy lifting on this. ARCH worked with a consultant, BAE Urban Economics, and they developed a model to look at the middle housing prototypes, and they looked at various sites, units, and floor area sizes. And then they did an analysis of costs, hard costs, including land acquisitions, soft costs, including construction costs, and a threshold for developer profit. So for all the scenarios, and this is just an example, and when we kind of meet again with the council, we probably will have Mike Stanger from ARCH attend the council meeting to provide more information about the inclusionary housing and the background of the model. So for the scenarios that ARCH analyzed, with the exception of duplexes and stacked flats, they perform better than one single family detached home. This is looking at their recommendation of $6 per square foot. So the fees generated would be approximately between $18,000 and $38,000, depending on the unit type. So tonight, and again, this is just a slide catching up here. I feel like I'm buffering here. So in terms of next steps, tonight the focus is on the Planning Commission recommendation. We've scheduled 3 meetings with the City Council as needed to discuss the draft code and get further direction. On May 5th, we'll be bringing our consultants, Kimberly Horn, as well as Mike Stanger from ARCH, to lead the discussion and address any questions. Any questions that we've received to date from council or from the community, or any comments we receive between now and May 5th, we'll put those in a matrix outlining what the questions are, what is currently said in code, and the staff response to those questions. And if there are substantial changes to the Planning Commission's recommendation, that will trigger the need for an additional public hearing. And that being the case, we've tentatively looked at June 9th for the public hearing, with ordinance adoption on June 23rd. And just as a reminder, we are required to have regulations in place by June 30th. And if we don't, then the state model ordinance will go into effect. So from a staff perspective, I would recommend that you adopt an ordinance prior to that June deadline, because it will then be more tailored to Kenmore. So on that note, I would now like to turn it over to the Planning Commission. They have a short presentation as well, which will again go through their thinking of what influenced the direction for the code amendments and the recommendation. Thank you.
Great. Hello, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. It is the Planning Commission's honor to come before you tonight with our recommendations for middle housing, accessory dwelling units, and inclusionary zoning code amendments. Some of this overlaps with what you just heard from staff, but we thought the repetition would be good given the amount of information you're being asked to take in tonight. As you heard, the impetus for our recommendations is HB 1110 related to middle housing and single-family zones, and HB 1337 related to accessory dwelling units. If we do not meet the state-imposed June 30th deadline, as Debbie just said, to complete this body of work, the state ordinance takes effect and we lose the ability to tailor code amendments to local context within the bounds given to us. To comply with HB 1110, we recommend in single-family zones R4 and R6, up to 2 units per lot and up to 4 units per lot within a quarter mile of a major transit stop, which would be along 522, or anywhere in the city when at least 1 unit is affordable. And to comply with HB 1337, we recommend in all single-family zones, allowing up to 2 accessory dwelling units per lot. When a municipality increases density allowances through comprehensive planning, as we are doing here, state law provides that they may decide to capture some of the value they have created for affordable housing. This is the context for our recommendation to institute inclusionary zoning regulations alongside middle housing code amendments. Planning Commission conceives of middle housing as modest-sized housing options that serve a broad range of people and families. Our recommendations for middle housing types maintain the same maximum footprint and height of current single-family homes and must adhere to the same impervious surface regulations. We see value in maintaining older housing stock and encouraging conversion of existing stock to other housing types, such as duplexes or stacked flats, given that older housing usually sells at a lower price point than new housing. We recommend offering reduced setbacks in exchange for lower height as an incentive and lower parking minimums by right to encourage a variety of housing types. We recommend encouraging smaller units, including cottage housing, to meet a variety of housing needs, and given that smaller units usually sell at a lower price point than large ones. And finally, trees, green spaces, and riparian areas are important to protect and maintain. The 6 housing types we recommend are the same as those you indicated you wanted to see in our last joint meeting. Again, they are duplexes, triplexes, stacked flats, cottages, townhouses, and courtyard apartments. Selecting these housing type fulfills one of the requirements of HB 1110. Again, HB 1337 mandates that cities allow for up to 2 ADUs on all single-family zoned properties, so that is what we recommend. Those ADUs can be attached, detached, or a combination of the two. There are some other requirements that come with HB 1337, which staff covered in their presentation. One way we are able to tailor middle housing code to our local context is through alternative compliance. HB 1110, as you heard, allows cities to exclude up to 25% of lots in single-family zones as long as they were not historically covered by a racially restrictive deed or covenant, as known to the city at the time of the comprehensive plan update. In order to plan for robust, connected riparian and wildlife corridors at the same time as we plan for increased density in our community, we recommend alternative compliance. This way, we think about the needs of our human and non-human neighbors simultaneously, making sure we are making space for both. The recommendation before you exempts R1 properties along Swamp Creek and R1 and R4 properties along the Sammamish River and 2 unnamed tributaries to the Sammamish River in South Kenmore. This protects some of Kenmore's riparian habitat, which may act as important wildlife corridors from increased density beyond what setbacks and critical area ordinances are able to do. This is about 14% of the total lots currently dedicated to single-family detached housing in Kenmore, well under the 25% allowed under alternative compliance. Middle housing regulations would apply to the majority of R4 lots and all R6 lots, which make up the majority of lots in Kenmore. Inclusionary zoning programs are local policies that tap the economic gains from increased real estate values created by comprehensive plan changes so that some of those gains can be used for affordable housing, either fee in lieu, actual units, or both. Inclusionary zoning policies were first developed specifically to counteract a history of exclusionary zoning that reinforced economic and racial segregation by keeping certain housing types and other developments out of residential neighborhoods. Although it cannot completely address these past injustices, inclusionary zoning done right can advance equity and be a source of affordable housing at moderate levels on-site or deeply affordable levels off-site if fee in lieu payments are directed as such. Most affordable housing relies on taxpayer subsidies. Inclusionary zoning is a way to generate affordable units or fees in lieu for affordable housing from another source. Inclusionary zoning is not likely to generate nearly enough fees or affordable units to solve our housing crisis, but every bit makes a difference. Local inclusionary zoning programs must vary in response to local conditions to make sure the profit developers can make continues to be higher than the cost of the program. This is why Arch created a model for Kenmore to guide us in our thinking about what could work in our community. Based on the Arch model, the commission recommendation before you is to adopt inclusionary zoning regulations that would apply to all residential developments in R4 and R6 zones of 4 units or more. In other words, developments of 3 or fewer units would be exempt. Require that 10% of the total number of units in the development be 50% AMI, very low income housing if renter occupied, or 80% AMI, low income housing if owner occupied. Developments could provide an affordable unit on site or pay a fee in lieu of the required fractional affordable unit. And it would make developments vested by December 31st, 2025 exempt to account for developers who may have already purchased land with current development regulations in mind. Some of the pros of a unit approach include single homeowners who want to modify their properties to meet their family's needs would be able to do so without incurring inclusionary zoning fees. And smaller builders who only ever complete smaller projects would be able to continue to do so without incurring inclusionary zoning fees. You will hear some cons to the unit approach in the minority report, one of which I will address now by saying that some of the developer loopholes of concern, such as seeing an increase in proposals falling 1 unit under the inclusionary limit, have been closed in other communities by clearly defining the terms applicant and at one location in their code. Another con expressed regarding the unit approach is that it does not allow us to control the size of units constructed. If we would like to see smaller units in our community, we can build policies that incentivize them even as they are subject to inclusionary zoning. Some ways to incentivize developments with smaller units that could work alongside inclusionary zoning might be putting those applications to the front of the permitting line or granting density bonuses. You'll now hear from commissioners on topics that surface as important in our deliberations. Each commissioner will speak for 1 to 2 minutes, and I will call on them in order. Commissioner Macias will speak on cottage housing first.
Good evening. Cottage housing. Previous public engagement revealed strong community support for cottage housing as an allowable missing middle housing type. In response, the Planning Commission was directed to include cottage housing as one of 6 selected types out of missing middle options. Cottage housing is a unique and innovative housing type. To support its successful implementation, the Planning Commission is recommending targeted code amendments and specific development standards tailored exclusively to cottage housing. These recommendations are outlined in newly proposed Chapter 18.75, specific to cottage housing. The goal of these amendments is to encourage the development of cottage housing citywide. The housing type offers a gentle infill approach that blends well with existing neighborhoods. It maintains a level of privacy similar to traditional single-family homes while promoting a sense of community through shared and private open spaces such as gardens, lawns, and tree-lined areas. These features also align with the city's commitment to environmental stewardship. Key development code incentives you'll see are reduced parking minimums and density bonuses. The Planning Commission hopes cottage housing will become a successful and appealing option for those seeking smaller scale, single-family living.
Okay, Commissioner Olson will speak on neighborhood benefits.
Hello, thank you. Some of the neighborhood benefits that we looked at have already been mentioned and discussed this evening. And I also am looking at parking. We, as a commission, voted to reduce parking requirements to 1 unit per, one stall per unit as a right. This is still a requirement. Developers may choose to build more parking if they so choose, or individuals may add parking on their lots if it's needed in their individual case. But the intent is to reduce the burden and allow for housing that may not have been feasible otherwise. As far as other incentives go, some of these have already been mentioned, but reducing building height in order to reduce setbacks. This is intended in some ways to work with cottage housing code. It could also work with some of the other housing types like duplexes or triplexes, and primarily to allow for flexibility of development. And then lastly, oh gosh, now I'm going to space on it because I didn't write this one down. We also looked at further reducing parking for cottage housing to 1 stall per 2 units. Once again, this is a incentive, not a requirement.
Vice Chair Thompson will speak on the environment.
Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council members. Well, I'm glad that we started with the right-of-way first, because if you thought that was going to be difficult, this will take up a whole lot of your technical time. So welcome to middle housing. The commission discussed many aspects of safeguarding our environment in Kenmore. Trees, streams, riparian areas, coastlines, parks, buffers, and wetlands, just to name a few. The recommendation is made up of many small votes, which validate the council's established policy safeguarding critical areas, trees, and the need for more, or I should say less, impervious land use. You will find opportunities to possibly fine-tune the recommendation as you go through it. An example would be the incentive chart found in the inclusionary zoning sections. Cottage housing limitations and building height may be opportunities to fine-tune with a council flavor. But just examples, and you're going to find a lot of other examples as you wander through this. Our recommendation is consistent regarding choices of who should benefit. The commission's position is that there should not be a method for developers or landowners to financially benefit above a normal return on investment, considering the location and normal conditions of allowances for our environment on that land. Once natural environment is lost, it will permanently make a change to Kenmore's livability. The city has embraced doing all it can do to negate climate change, and we heard all about that with the proclamations tonight. The recommendation moves us in that direction. Thank you very much for your attention tonight.
Commissioner Vanderlyn will speak on livability.
Good evening, City Council. Through its recommendations, the Kenmore Planning Commission has sought to balance the need to provide both additional and diverse housing choices within Kenmore, and while maintaining our neighborhood's current livability as housing density increases. The revised missing middle code recommendations would achieve balance by allowing a wide range of missing middle types while retaining the development and design standards in effect today. Important standards supported by these recommendations include missing middle housing options compatible with current residential development in our R4 and R6 neighborhoods, retaining current maximum impervious surface water standards, retaining tree retention policies, and including height, side, frontage, and parking requirements that include flexibility for non-standard lots.
And Commissioner LaSalle will speak on affordability.
Hi again. For our conversations that we've had, affordability was a really, really big topic. And we heard during the public speaking sessions that it was also something that many residents care about. Just for clarification, unfortunately, middle housing is not affordable housing, but affordability and those considerations were really important in our conversations. Obviously, we hope that middle housing will offer many options at many price points. And through that, while not affordable itself, will make it easier for residents to find solutions that match their price points from a market perspective. However, that will not address real affordability, and it will not be enough. We are creating value by enabling Kenmore to have more options and essentially repurposing existing construction, because the amount of units that exist or lots that exist without a unit constructed are very few and far between for Kenmore. So we're talking essentially about how do we repurpose existing units and existing lots. As we create this value, we do not believe that the city, and therefore taxpayers, should be funding all of the affordability itself, and everybody who contributes to this value creation should be asked to contribute in doing so. Since those conversions are inherently profitable, Arch really worked with us, and we heard about it a bit earlier, in building models based on very firm hypotheses and the experience of neighboring cities who've implemented that as well, to give us a strong rationale to provide this fee in lieu or on-site development model. And we believe that the inclusionary zoning that we recommend will not cause undue financial pain to developers and will not lead to hindering development of these units in our city. Nonetheless, we do not want to penalize families who just want to repurpose their lots, build an ADU, or maybe convert their too big a home because their kids have left the house into having additional rent and repurposing their upper level. And so that's why we're recommending that the 3 units or less do not get potentially penalized at the individual family level by inclusionary zoning fee in lieu. With that said, I will be the first to recognize that inclusionary zoning is only one tool in the affordable housing toolbox, and it will have to be used in conjunction with other initiatives that you, City Council, to decide on to make Kenmore truly affordable for its residents.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. The recommendations we have presented tonight were approved by a 4-3 vote. Commissioners Dorian, Macias, and Olson dissented and have prepared a minority report, which is in your agenda packet. They will speak to their minority report now, which expresses a differing opinion about how to implement inclusionary zoning.
Hello. Before I go on that, I missed one incentive. I knew it. I stumbled over my words there.
Yeah, we can't hear.
No worries. Is this better? Okay. I missed one item in the incentives before I go on the minority report, and that is the density bonus of 50% additional units for cottage housing if the units are 1,200 square feet or smaller. Just wanted to mention that, and that's off the base unit density. Onto the minority report. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council, I want to highlight a few key items in the minority report. First, we are in support of inclusionary zoning as a concept and think we should be encouraging affordable housing opportunities. That said, we are concerned, as the code is written, that we are unintentionally exempting low-unit single-family development and applying a more onerous burden on projects with similar scales but more units. If a project could have had 6 1,300 square foot units, a developer would have been affected by the inclusionary zoning fee in lieu. Instead, reasonably, they would likely choose to build 3 2,600 square foot units. This unintentionally may limit the available housing stock, retained or created, and continue a common development pattern we see in the community today, where lots are split and 2 to 3 large single-family homes are constructed where previously there was a single modest home. Built before land values rose and demand for housing had become a significant burden. Change will happen and people want to live in Kenmore. The bulk density of middle housing is consistent with new single-family construction, and generally so are the setbacks. As such, if we are going to see a redevelopment, see a lot of redevelopment, we hope to see a range of housing, not just primarily large homes as we see developed today, or condos in areas zoned for higher densities, but cottage units for small families or the elderly as they downsize, stacked flats with accessible entries for those who struggle with mobility, and other types of middle housing providing more attainable options for ownership of some green space or other needs as it fits them in their life. While concerns around protecting existing owners' ability to construct ADUs and middle housing on their property are real, we think there is a better way to achieve this goal while encouraging gentle density. Thank you.
Good evening. I'll make this very brief because Commissioner Olson echoed most of the items. Missing middle discussion has been ongoing since our January 27th joint council meeting. Inclusionary zoning portion had not the same amount of time and it could have had a substantive impact on missing middle housing. I believe there needs to be a deeper discussion surrounding potential impacts. Feedback was provided by several small and mid-sized developers and community members that we are not looking to mass develop, but add 1 to 2 small units that I hope you will engage with. For me personally, one of the goals of Missing Middle was first to create housing choice and retain older single-family homes, which in Arch's modeling shows tear down only. Cottage housing is something that we feel strongly for and wanted to encourage. That could, based on size, create a more attainable price point. I would very much like to see success in those areas and want to make sure our code and any inclusionary zoning does not create additional barriers.
All right, thank you, commissioners. So now the Planning Commission's work is complete. Council will have the month of May to deliberate. If you take up our recommendations as they are, there is no need for an additional public hearing. However, staff has left you time to hold a public hearing if you would like to deviate in any way from our recommendations. Whatever you decide is scheduled for adoption on June 23rd so that staff can file code amendments before June 30th, which is again the deadline in order for us to be able to tailor code to Kenmore. Thank you so much for listening to us tonight. We are happy to take questions or comments if you have them.
Questions? Councilor Lutzis?
First, I just want to thank you all for the significant amount of time and effort put into this. You know, I'm keenly aware of what it takes, especially the discussion of middle housing and ADUs. So thank you so much for that. I had a couple of quick questions. One is just a brief sort of technical question for Debbie and Todd, and then one more so directed to the commission. Debbie, can we amend policies after the June 30th deadline, or is what we pass set in stone?
No code is ever set in stone. So
Yes.
you can always amend. And I think in terms of the state law and regulations, I would not be at all surprised if future amendments come forward. So we may have to amend them per new state regulations, but also the city council also has the ability to amend code.
More so, yes, thank you. Thank you for your answer. That was more so rhetorical in the sense that I know that some concerns have been brought forward, and if, you know, there are loopholes or issues that arise later on that we can address if need be. And, you know, No policy is ever perfect, but we can try our best. The second one is for the commission. I'm just sort of curious, were floor area ratios FARs ever discussed, or footprint congruent with parent existing parent units? Just addressing, I guess, the concern brought up in the minority report of some sort of incentive to find a loophole to maximize that and go with bigger units and things like that, when the intent is to promote smaller developments.
We did not go with the FAR approach. It is certainly an approach that can be considered. Again, I think you have to consider in what context and what are you trying to achieve. So if that is something that council is interested in, I would sort of need some direction as to why, in other words, what problem we're trying to solve by taking that approach.
Of course, yes. And I'm not trying to complicate things, just more so addressing some of the concerns raised by the minority report. Thank you.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
A bunch. Thank you for all the work. This is not easy. And apologies if some of my questions are maybe dumb questions. We were given this relatively late in the process. So I just want to clarify a couple of things first. What are the 6 of 9 types? And in particular, I've seen townhomes included sometimes, which becomes a 7th type, and sometimes they're not. And so and it was actually lack of clarity in the verbal presentation as well. So I do want to put a pin in that. What are the 6 types? Because there's 6 types on the slide that do not include townhomes. So I guess the question is, are townhomes a type?
I believe the short answer is yes.
So then
They
we
are
have
one of the
selected
types.
7 types then, if that is the case.
Yeah, yes. So there's 7. We have to, at a minimum, choose
6 of 9,
but
correct.
there's 7 in the code, proposed in the code.
Okay,
Yes.
and just as a point of clarification, sometimes townhomes are included and sometimes they're not. So that needs to be a cleanup item if that was the intent. If that's the intent, I'd like us to think about as a council, whether we want to continue to support the courtyard apartment piece. That would be the piece I would consider removing from that list if we wanted to do that. So that's one thing. The slides, I think, were a little unclear, not the slides, I think it was in the code itself or the summary, whether bulk development standards, which are things like setbacks and height, are or are not required for each of the types. I think the intent is that they are required. I'm seeing Chair say yes, including cottage housing. So okay, so we're good on that. I have several questions about cottage, which I'll maybe put a pin in because I'm sure other people have questions. Can we clarify, I believe it's 1821-030. Again, I was looking at the summary and then trying to go back and forth to the actual code. The summary suggests that it is 2 or 4 units in addition to an existing single-family dwelling, which would bring the total to 3 or 5. Is that correct? I guess I thought the maximum was 4. And that's only within the quarter mile or if there's an affordable unit. But the way it's written is in addition.
Hold that thought and I'll
Okay.
search through the code. So keep going if you have more
Okay,
questions.
and then the last clarifying question, is the AMI level. I heard verbally it's 50%, and then I saw in writing it was 60%. So do we have a do we have a vote on that? Which is it? I mean, there's the 80% for the home ownership, but it was the rental level that, yeah, for the density bonus, yeah.
It's, if I may, it is 80% for the home ownership, as you pointed out.
Right, the
That's
rental level
our
is,
concerns, and you heard some concerns on the public comments about that, but that's what the law says. It's
Right.
50%
50%.
for the rental units.
Okay, because I think in writing it says 60, at least in one place, and don't ask me where, because I don't remember where. Okay.
Looks like Commissioner Olson might have something to add on this also.
This was a little bit of inconsistency between the middle housing code from the state and Arch's policy. So the 50% is for rental on inclusionary zoning policy. The 60% is for rental to have a fourth or a third and a fourth unit as a part of middle housing code.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. So that is intentional. Okay. Just see if there was any other, and then other than the cottage housing, there are several things on that, but can someone speak to kind of the rationale or maybe concretely, what does fully exempting R1 and the stream adjacent R4s get us more than what our current critical area ordinances already get us? The protections that those ordinances already provide.
So current things like setbacks and even our critical areas ordinances are not generally developed to be optimally protective of the environment. They are developed to tell us what development we will allow, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so by exempting R1 along Swamp Creek, R1 and R4 along the Sammamish River, and then I think there are R4s along the unnamed tribs
Yeah.
in South Kenmore, that protects those lots just from increased density. With more density comes more impact. And so exempting those lots from increased density would allow us to offer those lots protections above and beyond what setbacks and critical area ordinances can and do.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I just also wanted to add to this. I think another part of the idea there is as more people live in those places and call it a home, it becomes more difficult to see changes to restore the environment in the future. And so a piece of this is also to try and limit continued development in these areas so that as parcels become available, there are more restoration opportunities that individuals can provide.
Thanks. I'll let other people ask questions.
Councilor Marshall?
At the beginning of and thanks everybody for all your hard work, regardless of my reactions, as you might view throughout the presentation. Hopefully you were concentrating on what you needed to do. And it was all very well presented, I can tell you that. And I know you put in a lot of time and effort. So thank you. But I noticed at the beginning, there was a graphic that said no reduction of impervious surfaces. I was wondering how that was squaring with what I thought I heard was our goal of having the same standards as regular single family for impervious surfaces. And then also, this may not fit in exactly because I think it was a development regulation, but I think the council voted to try to provide incentives for minimizing impervious surfaces. So any take on that in an environmental perspective?
Yeah, so all housing types would have to conform to current impervious surface regulations. So they are not allowed increased impervious surface opportunity. We did consider as an incentive to kind of allow increased height for decreased impervious surface, but that was not a recommendation that the majority of the commission got behind, and so that did not advance. But all housing types would have to comply with existing impervious surface maximums for that lot.
Any other burning questions? I mean, I've got Well, no, if you have questions, you should go. Hey, Councilmember Sassen.
I'm sorry, I was distracted by trying to articulate my questions. I too am just so grateful that you all waded through this with such clear commitment and integrity, and have made it digestible to us to the degree that you have. I have a couple of points, so let me try to make them. I want to make sure that I have a grasp on our common understanding of the purpose for inclusionary housing. And so in my mind, the purpose of inclusionary housing is to capture value for the common good. Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I was on board with that. And then I did have a question about the 27-foot height. Is that for all of the 7 building types?
No, just for cottage housing.
Okay, perfect, because I just was having a really hard time envisioning how we were going to do a stacked triplex with 27 feet without making a daylight basement, you know? So
Yeah, and that is an incentive to perhaps encourage that housing type, given that we know certain types are going to require different uses of a lot. They'll still have to conform to maximum impervious surface requirements, but where things get placed on the lot might be optimized for different housing types. So in exchange for lowering the height, we would allow different setbacks just for that housing type.
thank you. I just wondered if it was across all. And then what I heard Ms. Benishensky say in particular is that we need a clear definition of applicant in code.
That's one of the ways in which another community closed that loophole. When developers they might start seeing like an increase in applications for one under the inclusionary kind of requirement. And to close that loophole, there was another community that got exceedingly clear on what an applicant means, which meant it was harder for developers to kind of submit applications as subsidiaries or what any of the other like legal methods that corporations have to suggest that they are separate when they are not. That was really clear in the definition and code. And then the other part of what that community did to close the loophole was to define what at the same place means, because as you heard from our commissioners who presented the minority report, another thing that you might see is lots being split and then submitting applications for each lot. When in reality, they would be a continuous lot. So in that case, you can define in the same place as, and you can make sure that splitting lots is not an option for developers anymore. And there's language from other communities that they've adopted that we could try as well if that becomes a concern.
Is this the conversation where we can indicate that those things be addressed, or how do we make those things happen?
Those could be suggested as code amendments. And if we feel those are substantive amendments, or if you add in other amendments, it could trigger a public hearing. But yes, you still have the opportunity to make changes to the code.
Okay. And then I had one more question. Let me see. The other thing that I heard as an extension of your conversation and also Councilmember Marshall's is that we need to have a further conversation in future about environmental protections such that they do what we want them to do. And I know that that is not this conversation, but I do want to put a pin in you and we having that conversation. Thank you very much.
You've already gone, Councilmember Marshall, so I'm going to go through my questions first, unless somebody else, okay. And I apologize. On page 137 of, I believe it's sorry, I'm bouncing between the two things, my notes, and I believe it's 137 of the draft middle housing and accessory dwelling unit amendments. Yeah. Page 137, it talks about off-street parking requirements. It talks about middle housing. It talks about the possibility of middle housing in downtown commercial or downtown residential west of 68th. And it appears, and this is, I know this is a question more for staff and the planning commission, but it appears that if somebody were to build middle housing in those areas, we'd actually require more parking than if they were to build it in R6. Because it says that the apartment, hang on. There's something like that the apartment requirements, or how does it say? Oh, come on. I'm trying to get Adobe to also act correctly, which is a whole other issue. Yeah, I think it might be under the apartment standards, but I think it, sorry, I'm gonna have to dig around a little bit. I made, this is the problem with reading a couple days ago and then having to switch between things. But correct me if I'm wrong, and you can correct me after this meeting too if you need to, but my understanding was that the way I read things was that if somebody wanted to do middle housing in the downtown commercial, downtown residential, that it sounded like they'd be required to build even more parking than would be necessary in R6 or other residential. And even though that whole area is within the walk shed for future BRT. So that's just something I'd like some clarification on. Doesn't have to be tonight. And I'm sorry for just tossing that to you. I thought I put that in email. I'm not sure, Debbie. So if I didn't, I apologize.
Nope, I'm probably not going to be able to give a definitive answer, but I would just need to make sure I've captured the right question to answer. So that's my purpose tonight, is that any questions or comments that you make tonight, I'm writing them down and I'll add these to the matrix. And that's one of them, is clarify parking. Those areas.
Okay. And if I misread that, I'm happy to
Yep.
be corrected.
Of course.
I have some concerns around just tying the requirements to lots rather than underlying kind of zoning density. I'm not sure why we would punish somebody who happens on a 10,000 square foot lot or 12,000 square foot lot by only allowing them to build X number of dwelling units compared to their neighbor who maybe has a 6,000 square foot lot and is able to build the exact same number. I'd be interested in having a discussion around how larger, lots that are out there, and there are plenty of them out there, that mom and pops may own or small developers might own, could not essentially be punished under how we're calculating by lot instead of by underlying density.
I'll clarify this further at the next meeting. It's not as easy as it sounds. So the density calculation, the new state law changed to not a density calculation, but more of the number of units on a lot. I'm going to make a terrible job of trying to explain that tonight, but I understand that's something that really needs to be clarified when we come back on May 5th about how the change in density units are calculated versus number of units on a lot. So certainly noted, and I think that gets back to an earlier question from Councilmember Srebnick as well. So I made a really good note about that to make sure if it's not clear in the code that it needs to be pretty clear.
And I appreciate that, because if we are essentially then forcing people to lot split, if they have a larger lot, we're adding a lot of additional costs too, and possibly other things with NUD and other governments by forcing a lot split rather than just allowing them to do it on a single lot. And I would hate for us to, inadvertently do things that, further increase the costs. I will say I'm not totally, and I know the council said, yeah, let's have the planning commission take a look at inclusionary zoning and come back to us with some ideas around it. I'm not totally sold that what we have in front of us, that the juice is worth the squeeze when we're talking about, well, no, I mean, when we're talking about relatively small units, we're talking things under 1,200 square feet generally. We could be talking about a amount that, would come up to $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, maybe $8,000 per unit. That we would be putting towards, as a fee in lieu. And I just don't know if that's worth the work. I do believe that we will see people who will build, In fact, I spoke with somebody today who said that if they had to choose between building 10 units or building 9 units and just paying the fee, that they would happily just build the 9 and leave the 10th unbuilt. And I think that's that's inadvertently us shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. I also, frankly, part of the reason why you put taxes and fees on something is hopefully sometimes to disincentivize them, and us adding additional cost towards something that we generally want, which is more and different types of development. I mean, we're adding a cost to something we're hoping people will build, and that's going to make it harder for folks to build the housing we're looking for. I know this is kind of out there, Debbie, and I include this in the email to you, but I would be more interested in us, and maybe this isn't something we can handle immediately, but if what we're looking for is more and affordable and different types of housing to get built, I'd be interested in us taking a look at an overall, something that applies throughout the whole city towards affordable housing, and setting some sort of density minimum in places. And if somebody wants to build less than the density minimum we're asking for, great, they can do that. But at that point, if what they choose to do is build a, 3,000 square foot single family house that goes for $1.8 million, if that's their choice, then pay into an affordable housing fund that we can then work with Arch to put it towards work, rather than making more affordable housing that we're trying to get built. And I don't mean more affordable housing, I mean more affordable housing. Then making that more expensive. I'm just not sure if this is going to bring in enough to be meaningful, and I do believe it's going to tamp down on potential development, which I think runs counter to the whole purpose of what we're trying to do here. So that's a concern that I have. And then along the exemptions for R1 and R4, Debbie, would ADUs and DADUs be allowed in those same zones? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I do have concerns around, especially around 80th. We're investing a lot in building sidewalks and a lot of infrastructure there for folks. And there's a lot of very long lots that maybe have a house on them. And I understand the concerns around, more impervious surfaces and all of that. If with the smaller forms that we're talking about allowing, like duplex, triplex, in the same general form and footprint of a single family house, I don't see how that's functionally different than allowing somebody to just plop down their 3,000 square foot box, because that's what's going to get built there. I would like, and I understand not wanting to do something, maybe we don't allow cottage housing there and, that, but I think I could see a net benefit in us allowing a duplex or a triplex that's in the same envelope as a single family house on those lots. And probably there are 4 lots also, which would still keep the footprint relatively close to what, is currently under use if there is future redevelopment, but would also not, would allow a little bit additional housing going if that's what somebody wants to do. It just feels like a bit of a waste to make all those improvements to 80th and then essentially tell one whole side of the street, you can't do anything there, even something as minimal as a duplex or a triplex. I can see why maybe we would want to allow, a sixplex or a cottage court, but that's just a concern that I have. Through what I was looking at. And I am curious, how did the commission end up settling on 1,200 square feet for cottages? Because I understand there was a discussion around it, but I'm just curious how the commission landed on 1,200 square feet.
That was part of the discussion. I think Arch recommended the 1,200, if I'm correct, but there was discussion surrounding, do we make that larger? Do you increase that footprint? Do you make that consistent along development standards and energy code so that square footage is consistent all along?
And actually, that was one of the flavors in voting that that little piece that happened in the commission, and we felt it was the 1,200 was the best choice for our city and how it looks.
I think a piece of the intent was also to try and provide at least 2-bedroom units. It does not go so far as providing 3-bedroom units at that 1,200 square feet. And I believe we brought up the idea of increasing that at the end with Kimley Horn. And one of the things they mentioned is on a smaller lot, it may be difficult if we increase that size for that density bonus to be feasible, especially under impervious area code. So we almost increased it, actually. I think I made a motion, or almost made a motion, for 1,350 square feet, which was a recommendation from an architect on inclusionary zoning, actually, but I thought it made sense for cottage housing in particular. And I remember that being a response from Kim.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think the 1,200 square feet was, that's associated with the community benefit or the neighborhood benefit. A cottage housing, if they're not using the benefit, could be any size that the law would allow.
Okay.
Your
Councilor
Honor.
Marshall.
And I apologize for this. It was clearly presented, but can someone again give me a very brief bird's eye summary of the map? I know that I got in my head, we've got exemptions or proposal for exemptions for the riparian Swamp Creek zone, for an exemption for up in, I believe, a ravine between Inglemore and Arrowhead. I think that's still there. And then down by the slough on the southeast portion of that. Okay. So then what about the dwelling units per lot of, if you could break it out for me, of the 1/4 mile from transit and then beyond that? Are we still making a distinction between the 1/4 mile versus beyond the 1/4 mile?
Yes, there is a distinction between the 1/4 mile and beyond the 1/4 mile. State law says within a 1/4 mile of transit stops, which are the transit stops on SR 522, 4 units by right is allowed. Outside of that, state law says 2 units. That's the distinction
And
between
our proposal, but our proposal is what?
that is the proposal.
That is the proposal. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Shubnik.
Okay, now I'll go to my cottage housing questions. Thank you so much. And before that, I just do want to concur with Mayor Herbig on the 2 points. The inclusionary zoning, particularly for the, fee and lieu level, the 4 through 9. I really feel like that's the level that we really, really want, is those smaller developments that would just almost seamlessly fit into the community. And, getting 10 grand per unit, I mean, that's not going to make a remote a dent in our ability to support additional affordable units on something somewhere else. I mean, it's not. I mean, you'd need hundreds of those. So I just don't, I fully concur with Mayor Herbig on that. So for your list for the 5th, Debbie, I will give you a very, very concrete example where I live. And we're in an R6. We are sitting on a ½ acre. So technically that is well more than an R6. So, getting really clear, again, to Mayor Herbig's point of what would, not that I want to develop it at all, but what would someone who wanted to fully develop that under this ordinance, what would that allow? Would they have to split the lot? If so, why are we moving in that direction? And, sort of what are we talking about for someone who actually wanted to do that? Okay, so cottage housing. There in the summary, it says that more regulatory work either is needed or was needed to allow for cottage housing. Is that the one that you did develop? Does that take care of it, or is there more that still needs to be done around cottage housing? I mean, it's not the, it's the 0.75, I think, what is it, 1875 or something like that? I can't remember the exact number, but
So there are regulations proposed for cottage housing, so those are in place. We didn't have those before, so now this proposed code does provide how cottage housing would be regulated.
and we don't, I mean, that does address it. I mean, we don't
Does-
need
it does
more.
address it.
Okay, so that was a kind of a, we needed it and now we've done it. And I'm curious, I mean, maybe this goes to the May 5th thing. What really a 50% density, I mean, getting back to, what can you do on what kind of lot? What is a 50% density bonus, which is a lot, for cottage housing look like? I mean, what does that mean for like number of units on what kind of lot? Yeah, I am curious what, and maybe I misread this. It looked like cottage housing parking standard was lower, or maybe because the other ones looked higher. Yeah, can somebody speak
It
to
was
that?
lower, yeah. It's one stall for 2 units or half a unit per stall, or sorry, half a stall per unit.
And given it that it's just a small detached dwelling unit, smaller, why is that? Is that a requirement that the state has that we go to the half?
That's simply a minimum. I would expect most developers might build more than that, frankly.
Right. I'm curious what the rationale was. Was that, is that a requirement or is that something that the planning commission decided or, where does that come from?
It was more around design flexibility, so you don't
Okay.
have to hit a full stall per unit.
Okay.
Right, otherwise, if you have 6 units on a lot, you're looking at 6 parking spaces, whereas we're requiring 3, which means you could build 4, you could build 5 if you needed to. So
Gotcha.
I would
Yeah.
expect most developers are gonna try to build at 6 stalls or more potentially.
Okay.
But if you can't, for some reason, you're not stuck in your design.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, market forces would suggest that we're going to need a stall. And I'm curious and I know everywhere cottage housing is defined like this, but is there a reason that we have to require the courtyard in there, the shared outdoor space? There is. I mean, could we not just have 3 little houses on a lot? I mean, why do we, is there a reason? Yeah,
I
or
think-
4 houses.
I think typically that's the case because it's common open space. So usually you own the home and then the common open space is owned in common. I mean, you could essentially still have, 3 units on a lot, might not be cottage housing. Typically cottage housing is more of a clustered development.
Right.
So again, it's all in the definition of whether it's a cottage housing or it's a duplex or something. I mean, it could still be smaller units on one lot, but would it necessarily be cottage housing? So I
But you
think it's
could
just
do, I mean, what is it called if it doesn't have a shared common space and it's little houses next to each other? I mean, what is that?
Would that be small houses on
just be
small
small
lots?
houses
Yeah.
on the base.
And those are,
houses
and
on
those are
small lots.
okay.
Yes,
Those
Yeah,
are
that's
okay.
fine. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
it's not precluding that. I just think it's just the style
Okay.
of cottage housing means there's a common open space and it's typically tied to the ownership, how the units
Right,
themselves
right,
are
yeah.
owned and the underlying land.
Okay, as long as we're not precluding the
Nope.
other.
No, we're
Okay.
not.
Thank you. That's it.
Councilor Sassen?
Yes, thank you. I just want to also tag on to what Mayor Herbig said. With inclusionary zoning, the purpose being capture value for common good. I see your point, Mayor Herbig, as being a both and rather than an either or. And so from my point of view, yes, building a large single home on a lot that could accommodate more, definitely I would add that to who contributes to our housing budget. I would love to see some financial incentive tacked on. And then, but I am also in favor of the smaller units participating so that with fee in lieu, because to me that demonstrates a partnership between the developers and the city and the people and our needs. And I'm in favor of promoting that partnership.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Not seeing any. I want to thank all of you for all of your hard work. I know I say this every time, but we would not be able to function as a council if we did not have a wonderful planning commission, and we are very lucky to have each and every one of you. So thank you for your service. Thank you for all the time you put into this. And yeah, really deeply appreciate all of your work. So thank you very much. And with that, unless there's any objections, the Kenmore City Council will take a 10-minute break and come back at 9:26. the council could return to order. All right. Next on our agenda is new state regulations for co-living and residential parking, presented by Principal Planner Todd Hall and Senior Planner Brittany Chu.
Right, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members, hello again. Just a brief presentation by our new Senior Planner Brittany Chu, you just met this evening. And I assured her that, you know, this is her first presentation to you, so just take it a little bit easy, but no, in all seriousness, that this should be a lot easier to digest and understand, hopefully, than the middle housing. It's definitely not as complex. These are some new regulations that were passed within the last year or so, and we're just playing catch up to amend our code for this year's docket. So Brittany will have a few slides here to go over both of these subjects, and then like we did with the last one, if we're able to answer some questions now, we can, but likely we'll take notes, and then our intent is to bring back the draft legislation for you tonight or at the next meeting, which would be June. But if you happen to have anything tonight you want us to bring back, just let us know and we'll be happy to address that. So Brittany. There you go.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of the City Council. Community Development staff are pleased to be here tonight with you to present new state regulations for co-living and residential parking. So we will provide you with a brief introduction on the bills, and then we'll ask for your direction on an item that will assist staff with drafting amendments. So co-living is defined as a residential development with sleeping units that are independently rented and lockable and provide living and sleeping space. And residents share kitchen facilities with other sleeping units in the building. So an example of co-living units in our area is the Tudor Apartments in Redmond. They consist of 61 co-living units ranging from 220 to 300 square feet. They are designed to mimic the appearance of townhouses. So we may see other co-living units being built that look like some of our middle housing types. Others look similar to apartments. So co-living can have different names. Issaquah and Kirkland are using co-living as a name. Snohomish County is using dwelling co-living. Many of the other jurisdictions have not passed the co-living code yet. In the city of Kenmore, Kenmore used to have dormitory as an allowed use in the code, but it was repealed by a previous ordinance in 2017. Kenmore now uses a similar term called micro-housing dwelling unit, which means an apartment with a square footage of 220 to 320 square feet, with common kitchen or bath facilities being optional. So this is a little bit different than co-living sleeping units, because right now this is our smallest dwelling unit, but it does involve having a kitchen and a bathroom, whereas sleeping units, they have a shared kitchen, and then bathrooms can either be in unit or they can be shared. And then the Washington State Building Code requires sleeping units to have a minimum size of 70 square feet, so they're smaller as well. And dwelling units have to have a minimum size of 190 square feet. And this is an example of what a co-living unit could look like on the inside, with a bathroom and unit, a mini fridge, a microwave. The Washington Legislature passed House Bill 1998 in 2024 last year. So HB 1998 requires cities and counties planning under the Growth Management Act to adopt development regulations allowing co-living. So Kenmore must adopt co-living regulations by the end of this year, or the state code will apply. The purpose of the bill is to provide more housing options and market rate non-subsidized rental homes. Co-living requires, or the state regulations will require the city of Kenmore to allow co-living housing in a permitted use on any lot located within an urban growth area that allows at least 6 multifamily residential units, including mixed-use zonings. So we'll go over that in a little bit of where that's going to apply in the city of Kenmore. And co-living cannot be more restrictive than multifamily standards in the code. So, some other co-living regulations. So parking requirements are at most 0.25 of a parking space per sleeping unit. And if they're within half a mile of a major transit stop, parking is not required at all for these units. Density is calculated as one sleeping unit, counting as 1/4 of a dwelling unit. And sewer connection fees are limited to half of a dwelling unit. So the utility fees are also less. And this is another example of Ramiro's Place in Seattle. So it's another co-living units. These are apartments ranging from 160 to 220 square feet. So where will this apply in Kenmore? So for residential zones, it will apply anywhere that is R6 all the way up to R48. So on the map, this will be the brownish yellow color on the map. So it's a large portion of Kenmore, and with mixed-use zonings, neighborhood business, community business, areas downtown, and a lot along 522 as well. So the benefits of co-living is it just provides another housing type and option for people who want a low-cost alternative to living with roommates. They provide shared community spaces that facilitate social connections. It provides affordable housing options in transit-oriented neighborhoods, and they reduce energy usage from smaller units. So the Carsey Apartments are another example of co-living units in Seattle, ranging from 187 to 276 square feet. And they also have some mixed-use income-restricted apartments built in. So affordable housing code will also apply to the co-living units. And co-living units can also be beneficial as an additional housing option for seniors. This article highlights the experience of Carl, a senior living in the Arete Apartments in downtown Kirkland. Carl plays Monopoly in the lobby with other neighbors and cuts hair at a barbershop a few blocks away. So this is an example of how co-living units can encourage walkability and a sense of community. And now moving on to residential parking. So Senate Bill 6015 passed by the state in 2024. It establishes new requirements for the residential parking regulations and the Growth Management Act. So part of the regulations is that it sets minimum parking space dimensions no wider and longer than 8 by 20 feet, except for ADA spaces. It also allows for tandem parking spaces for all residential parking. And tandem spaces are when there's one car in front of the other, and there's one means of going in and going out. And this is at a rate of 1 space for every 20 linear feet. So some additional regulations. The city can no longer require garages, carports, enclosed or unenclosed spaces to meet minimum parking requirements. So parking can either be enclosed or unenclosed. And for surfacing, the city allows required parking spaces to be paved with grass block pavers. So the picture on the right shows what that could look like. So that will be another option. So instead of requiring parking to be paved or having asphalt, this will provide another low-impact development, helping with stormwater mitigation. And also, the regulations will allow up to 6 parking spaces in legally established non-conforming gravel parking areas to count toward minimum parking requirements. So after the 6 gravel spaces, then the parking spaces will have to be paved or follow the standards or grass block pavers. And then there's no required minimum parking spaces if compliance with tree retention would make the residential development infeasible. So this is prioritizing tree preservation and retention over parking. So for example, if a developer is going to build something and has to meet certain parking criteria, and there's trees in the way, they're able to preserve the trees and not meet those minimum requirements. So one of the questions we would like to ask you all is, what should co-living be called in the code? So originally with this presentation in the memo, we had a couple other questions related to another bill. So we were anticipating that bill to be passed. It was passed last week. It originally applied to cities with a population over 20,000 people, but it was amended to be cities over 30,000 people. So those 2 questions were taken out. So for now, we just have co-living name. What should co-living be called in the code? Should it be co-living or any of these other names? And then for next steps, so in June, we'll discuss the draft ordinances on co-living and residential parking. And in July, we'll have a public hearing, and then in September, hopefully council adoption. And so the next steps in June, this is what it would look like. We would talk about the chapter, the topic, the policy decision, the proposed text amendment, and then the impacts of that policy. Okay. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for all your time. Please let us know if you have any questions.
Questions, comments? Councilor Lutzis?
Would you like us to jump in with the question that you proposed to us on what we would prefer it to be called?
Yeah, thank you. That'd be great.
This appropriate? Okay. I personally, in looking through this list, the first thing that stuck out to me that I felt was most appropriate was single room occupancy. I think that's just general, and in terms of this context and how we're discussing it, seems to be broad, sort of fit that. And I think it's very descriptive too. So if any member of the community is reading through, at least I think that kind of describes what we're getting at with the zoning requirements here, where I think some of these others might seem very hyper-specific and may not fit a broader definition.
Any other strong feelings about the name, Councilor Marshall and Councilor Schrebeck?
Not particularly strong, but I do like the single room occupancy. It does seem to be like the most accurate. I have a very strong vintage affection for rooming house and boarding house, because that's what we've had for 100 years, in Seattle. But no, the single room occupancy is more accurate.
Councilor Schrebeck?
A question. Say, I think one more time, the distinction between the co-living and the micro units, and I think it was having to do with the kitchen, although some of the pictures look like there were kitchens in the co-living. So can you clarify?
Yeah, of course. And thank you all for your comments as well. Yeah, so in Kenmore Code, we allow currently for micro housing dwelling units. So that means that it has living space, sleeping space, kitchens that are in units, and also bathrooms that are in units. And the picture showed those were examples of sleeping units. So those, based on co-living, they have to have a shared kitchen, but they can have sometimes what people call a kitchenette. So they can have things like a mini fridge or microwave, counter space. And then bathrooms are optional. They can either be in unit, but if they're not in unit, then they have to be provided as shared bathrooms. But at least it seems like the ones in our region seem to be leaning more towards in-unit bathrooms is what we're seeing.
And shared kitchen. Okay, so they are different because of the
Yes.
kitchen, in particular, the kitchen issue. I'm okay with single room occupancy. It does have SRO has a somewhat of a legacy meaning. I think of Belltown. Downtown Seattle had a lot of older SROs. We could, what do we talk about? Reclaiming some of these words. So, I would be open to reclaiming. I'm also fine with co-living or micro unit. So.
Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Culver?
Yeah, thank you. I'll throw a vote in for co-living just because that seems to be what we're using to describe it. I like it. Stick to it. And also wanted to say welcome aboard.
Thank you. Yeah.
Councilor Sasson?
If we're voting, I would say for me, similarly, I have this sort of, East Coast old city association with rooming houses and boarding houses and lodging. And to me, the most descriptive of what you're talking about is the single room occupancy or micro unit. When we first started talking about this, I was like, oh, I did co-living, I've done that, but really that was a house shared by housemates. So co-living has a very different meaning to me, but I'm old. So the younger people may have a very different feeling about that. Like I met my husband like that, come on. But I just, for me, the clarity of single room occupancy or micro unit makes sense.
Any other comments? I'm ambivalent about the name, although I'm all for reclaiming SRO. I don't know. I kind of like SRO. I mean, actually, they contributed quite a lot in downtown. Any other comments or questions? All right. Well, yeah, Councilor Shrubnik.
Well, to Councilmember Sasson's point, I too had a stint in a rooming house. It sounds like we all have. But is that this? This is not that, right? I mean, this wouldn't be in a house-like structure. Or could it be? I mean, what does this include? And I don't know who I'm asking.
Yeah, Councilor Sasson.
The thing that triggers for me is, we had like our housing partners come and talk about moving the folks who are currently resident at Heron Haven into a more group living style. And when we first started talking about this, I thought, oh, is that would this fit that bill? But and I don't know the answer to that, because really what they would be looking for is, is a shared housing situation. What do you think about that? I mean, I think it's just.
This is where it gets down to the definitions.
Yeah.
So I think we need to kind of make sure that whatever definitions we currently have in the code make a clear distinction between what you're talking about or co-living. And if it doesn't, then maybe that's an additional amendment that we need to make in the code.
Another thought is ensuring that we're meeting the intent of what the state bill is asking for. But I just did a quick search for rooming house, and I'm older, but not quite in that. But I'm just saying, like, in terms of, so I see the differentiation between co-living and what the state law is intending is, I think that's more for middle house, or mixed use kind of environments. So think of the zones that it's being proposed in, which is the higher density zones. And then a rooming house, looking at as kind of a multi-tenant type of a house. So you have a home and then people are renting rooms out of that house. So I think there's a differentiation. So looking at all the names, I think, okay, co-living, micro units, and single room occupancy probably fits this definition better of what the state is intending to pass versus boarding house, rooming house. Those, hopefully that makes more sense.
However, I do want to make sure that what, William Towie came and talked to us about from Lake City Partners is if it needs to be protected in code here in Kenmore, that we also do that.
Yeah.
Further comments or questions? All right. Thank you very much. Great job on your first presentation. Appreciate it. And
Thank you.
yeah, that brings us to our last piece from the business agenda. City of Kenmore's fourth quarter 2024 financial reports presented by Finance and Administration Director Melinda Merrill from Morrell. Sorry.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm excited to finally bring this report to you. It's been a long time coming. And so this is the final report for 2024. I know we're in 2025. So this is year to date. This is full biennium has been elapsed. And I just kind of want to go over how we ended. And I want to talk a little bit about future state. I don't have a lot about future state tonight, but I just want to prime that a little bit too. So this is the revenue screen. This is how we ended the biennium. You can see our initial budget or amended budget was 32.9, almost 33 million, and we ended up with total revenues of 35.4 million, so about 7% more. And you can see the main areas of that: other taxes, development fees and permits, and investment interest. I've been talking about investment interest all year, so that's no surprise. I think you've also heard about the development fees, and other taxes includes some of the, the gambling, business and occupation taxes and cannabis. So those are running higher than anticipated. Under our expenditures, overall, we came in below budget of 33.4 million and we expended 29.4. So at 88% of the budget. I'm sure you all know why that is, because we used ARPA money to pay for public safety costs in 23. So that should be no surprise there. Some other areas where we underspent quite a bit was human resources, because we chose not to hire a budget manager that was included in there. Those dollars were used in the city clerk area, which ended up having 2 people. So that's why that line item is a little bit over. It would have been more over. However, there's dollars in the city clerk that went down and were spent in housing and human services for contracts, and that is why housing and human services is overspent. So there's kind of a 3-way mix of where those dollars were landing between budget and actuals. Public safety you see is low. Housing and human services, I mentioned, that's running high. And then community development was low because they had a person leave and that position was not filled. Those are kind of the general happenings. And then if you're kind of wondering why we show a deficit in the budget line item and you see a red 419, it's because we decided to add late in the budget cycle a transfer of $650,000 from the general fund for Lake Point. And so that makes our budget amount off because we didn't have corresponding revenues to go with that. So that's why it looks overspent, even though we didn't ultimately. So what are our reserve requirements? We are required to have 20% of our, as it says, 20% of annual operating expenditures need to be retained. So that would be about $3.3 million. And we ended the year with 9.6 million of actual fund balance. Here's our investment schedule. I wish I had a current one. I was trying to find the current one, but I didn't find it in time. But so the top part are the bonds that we invest through time value investments. And we have almost $9 million principal, and that's averaging a yield of 3.61%. And then the monies at the bottom are liquid monies. So we can readily access those. There's no maturity on those. And that's 38 million. It's a big number. Why is it a big number? Because we got big bond proceeds right at the end of the year. So that's adding in and giving us a total account value of 47.4 million. I wanted to point out that at the, because interest rates are gonna start going down, but right now the LGIP, which we have a lot of money in, is at, I think the last one I just looked at was 4.3 maybe. So it's still over 4.4%, which is good. In our bonds, that top one, 1.67, is now gone. And we've actually added 2 investments in the bonds, and one is over 4% and one is just under, and they're both, one's a longer term one and one's more in the middle of the schedule. But I don't have that with me, but we're still looking really good for investment dollars today, and we're weekly monitoring the LGIP, which can dip. And so it's a balance between how much in LGIP and how much in the bonds, and maintaining that liquidity that we might need. So that's how that's looking. So street fund, we ended the year, revenues were lower than we anticipated, but you'll see on the next screen. So were expenses. We do rely on transfers from the Transportation Benefit District Fund, as well as some monies from the general fund. And then the fuel tax is kind of the bigger portion of revenues that come in that budget. And then here's our expenditures, again, lower than we thought. Thus, we ended the year with more revenue than expenditures. This is a new one for you guys. Since CAPE is new, I haven't really shown this report. So we had a budget of 800,000 for, it says infractions, but those are obviously the revenues. And just for interesting point, you've probably heard Tobin talk about this, but we get reporting on these photo enforcement charges and they show up as parking tickets. I don't know if you guys knew that, but on the reports, yeah, it shows as a parking ticket because it doesn't know who the driver was, right? So you can't be assigned anyone, so they show up as parking tickets, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, so we brought in $921,000 in revenues. And you can see I showed you the little breakdown there because obviously the program just started up in 23, so 218,000 in 23 and 703 in 24. And then you can see our costs. We did transfer about as much as we could out of this into transportation capital to fund some of those capital projects. So you can see that we ended the year after that $250,000 transfer, we ended the year at $28,000 excess. Public Works, obviously they're sitting on a lot of money that will be spent towards the construction costs. We have spent just under $1 million so far, $881,000 of construction costs. We do make a little bit of interest in this account. We will make a lot more now that that big wad of 12 million will be sitting there as it slowly gets spent down. And so we obviously have a big balance of $17 million. Surface water management. This fund, as you know, will be increasing because we've increased our charges over the next several years. So right now we're at, we brought in 7 million. I think we're budgeted, I know I wrote it down, we're budgeted to bring in 9.7 million over this current biennium. So a lot more money to fund all the projects that we have coming up. And then our expenses, those vary because we do shift a lot of the costs from surface water management over into the swim capital fund. And we have a cash balance of over 2.5 million in this fund. And then impact fee revenues, obviously these fund a lot of our activities as well. Brought in more park impact fees than anticipated and the transportation impact fees as well. That obviously goes hand in hand with our higher development costs that we brought in as well earlier, or in the earlier slides that you saw. And then you can see the cash balance is off to the right. REIT and TBD, Transportation Benefit District funds. REIT came in a little bit lower than the budget. We do have a cash balance of 1.5 million. I'm looking at how we're trending. We are trending a little off so far. So that is one account I will be watching really, really carefully because we really need those dollars to come in at budget. So I will be keeping an eye and reporting back on that every time I come see you. TBD monies are coming in as expected. Those are the dollars that we get from the car tab fees. So that's going to be pretty consistent throughout the year. So my summary is that our revenues are above budget. Our expenditures are below budget, but we know why that is. Interest revenue brought in a lot of money for the general fund, which was really helpful. Our development fees and permits came in high, and then public safety costs were low from ARPA funding. And then, of course, we issued the new debt late in the year. And so I just wanted to mention also that, again, looking ahead, there definitely are concerns as you all have been hearing in the news about costs and how much things are going to cost, we have the Public Works Operations Center coming up. And, those estimates were from a long time ago. There were some reserves built into that, but there's definitely concerns there. So definitely have concerns about the forecast, and we'll be reworking the forecast for expenditure costs, and as well as any revenues that we feel might be impacted. Definitely REIT, development fees, fuel tax are areas where we could very well see shortfalls in our revenues. Our development fees, we didn't budget high based on what we earned this past biennium. That was held flat. But again, I mentioned the REIT, which we need to bring in the dollars there, and the fuel tax helps with the street fund. So it's not as big of a number, but it's an important number nonetheless. So those are just kind of some things to be thinking about as I come forward again with more information. Any questions?
Questions? Councilmember Lutzis.
No questions, just a couple of comments. I wanted to thank you. And you caught a lot of the things that I am also watching very closely and a little nervous about. Of course, I think you had mentioned intergovernmental transfers, particularly from the state. Not only fuel tax, since that's progressively declining in terms of how much the state's actually collecting with cars with more vehicles with better miles per gallon, more electric hybrid vehicles and the such, and what that looks like. But also potentially, if they're based on the economic state of Washington, whether or not liquor, cannabis, or some of the other intergovernmental transfers could be potentially impacted as the state looks to maintain as many sources of revenue as they can. I was on the same thought process as you with permits and fees, and all of those, as you mentioned, REIT, but everything else in that sort of revenue section. Considering a potential decline in development, the potential impacts of tariffs in the future, we don't know what that looks like, and that does give me a lot of pause about materials, labor, and all of the such, and just how that could drastically impact those values that we had budgeted for last year. As you had mentioned, CAPE, looking at those trends too, I know that we're currently budgeted to have increasing revenue from that, and just curious when that starts to level off or decline a little bit. So just watching that, especially as a new revenue source. And then, as you had mentioned, investment income and just how interest rates are going to be impacting our investments across the board. So again, watching these very closely. So thank you for catching those things. And I just wanted to point those out and say, since they're already in the front of your mind, just something I'm also interested in. So the next time that this comes up, these are the things that I'm definitely looking for. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Sassen.
Well, of course, thank you. And also, I think this is a delicate time, and I think that we will be looking as a council to be joined at the hip with you. I think we'll be looking to connect with you often so
Good.
that we make sure that we are on track.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that.
All right.
I do appreciate your flexibility. I know this was originally scheduled for last week, but it ended up being the only thing on the business agenda, and it felt more prudent to move it to this week. So thank you for that. And thank you for the report. It was always enlightening. So thank you. That brings us to staff reports. The manager?
Yeah, nothing this evening. Thank you.
Okay, councilmember reports and comments. Councilmember Culver.
Reed Palestine, happy Monday.
Councilmember Marshall.
Council may recall when we passed our tenant protection ordinance that I advocated vigorously for small landlord exceptions. It's worth keeping an eye on some legislation in the latest bill. I can't remember, it's 1217 or 1271. It's one of the two. But that latest language is considering exemptions from at least the rent increase cap for units that are occupied in part by the owners. In other words, like renting out the rooms, renting out your house, and accessory dwelling units as well. So I was just happy to look at that, and maybe we'll keep an eye on it for potential future considerations.
Councilor Sassen?
Yes, I just want to make a report from NUSA. We are coordinating regarding I'm going to read this, the Affordable Housing Week, which is coming up. And we, as Councilmember Strebnick and I did last year, we here, Tammy Cork and I will be, maybe just me, I'm not sure, yes. We'll be hosting the virtual lunch and learn here in the council chambers. And that'll be from 11 to 12 on May 14th. The speaker will be Greg Colburn, author of Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And how that worked basically last year, and I'm hoping it will again, is that folks from Kenmore will come and join us, and we'll participate in watching on the big screen the presentation, and then we'll move into a discussion format. I learned quite a bit last year, and I'm looking forward to sharing and learning with whoever is willing to come again this year. Thanks so much.
Councilor Strebnick?
Yeah, just a brief update on NPRSA, North Shore Parks and Recreation Service Area and Regional Policy Committee. So just FYI, the NPRSA ballot measure will be, and we're not speaking pro or con. I just want to flag that it is coming up this November, and RPC with the county council passed the parks levy, which will be on a ballot measure this August. So I would love for us to, prior to that, have that come before us for things like resolutions. So just sort of flagging that as getting that on our calendars. I don't know who I'm flagging that to, but
I
yeah.
think that was already in the plan given.
Okay,
given what's
perfect.
there, but if it isn't, we'll make sure that that comes in front of us. Councilor Lutzis?
Yes, just a couple of things. Just a reminder to folks that tomorrow is a special election. It's Election Day, April 22nd. So if you got your ballot in the mail, please vote. Vote in every election you can. I think it's important to have your voices heard. And even in these special elections, there's often very important things on the ballot. So please pay attention to those and make your voices heard. A couple of other things. King County Metro has changed their seasonal routes. They're on new routes going for the summer season, and they have begun enforcing fares. So they now have fare enforcement personnel that are going out and reminding folks, and then at a little later down the line, they will begin issuing citations. So please, check to see if you qualify for a free or reduced fare on King County Metro's website. And also, in addition to that, just a heads up that fares will be increasing to $3 in September. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
And I don't have anything to add either. So with nothing more to come before us, we are adjourned.